Chapter 1085. They were intoxicated by the deliciousness of the sashimi and fell into the trap of the grilled fish. The big crabs that were caught did not require any seasoning. They were steamed in the pot for a short while, and they could enjoy the ultimate plump taste. Seafood was caught one by one, and Meg cooked them into delicacies. When he put down his chopsticks, everyone on the wooden boat burped in unison and revealed satisfied smiles. "Boss, you fed us so well. It's such a blessing to come out with you." Yabamiya looked at Meg, who was tidying up the kitchen utensils, with a fangirl smile on her face. She probably could not find another man like him in this world. Elizabeth looked at Mia and then at Meg. She frowned slightly. It was undeniable that Meg was indeed a very outstanding man. She had not seen anyone in the dragon tribe that could be compared to him in terms of character and ability. However, the difference in lifespan between the dragon tribe and humans was too great. She did not dare to imagine the loneliness after 100 years. As an elder sister, even if Mia really had feelings for Meg, she had to remind her. "As long as everyone likes it," Meg replied with a smile. It felt good to gain a little fangirl. But why isn't Sister Gina back yet? Did she run into some trouble? Amy asked worriedly as she leaned against the side of the boat and looked into the water. "I heard from Grandpa that there are many ferocious magical beasts in the sea. What if Sister Gina runs into danger in the sea alone?" Anna's little face was also full of worry. The sea is Gina's home. She can unleash her abilities to the maximum in the water, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem, Meg said. However, there was also a hint of doubt in his eyes. Gina had been gone for 2 to 3 hours. With her speed, she should have returned by now. He was confident that the ruler of the mermaid tribe would soon come to negotiate with him after seeing the blueprint. Amy turned to look at Meg and said with anticipation, "Father, why don't we go down and take a look? I've never been to the sea before. It must be super fun down there, right?" Meg looked embarrassed. He had just escaped from the water, and now he had to go back into the water. He definitely wouldn't go down even if he was beaten to death. In his state, going down would only lead to death. The Jiaolong Deep Sea Explorer is the best choice for deep sea exploration, treasure hunting, and sightseeing. I don't want you for 10 million copper coins. I don't want you for 1 million copper coins. 499,999 copper coins. I'll rent the Deep Sea Flood Dragon Exploration ship. 8 comfortable cabins, fully automatic driving, underwater speed up to 1,000 knots, maximum depth of 16,000 meters. What was there to consider? Rent a Jiaolong Deep Sea Exploration vessel, bring your children and beauties, and have an unforgettable deep-sea adventure. At this moment, a water droplet-shaped submersible popped up in Meg's mind. At the same time, he heard the cheerful voice of the system. "Meg, system, the way you earn money is really heartbreaking." Meg couldn't help but sigh. "What do you know?" Back then, in order to capture a sample of the nether shark for research, the system invested a lot of money in creating this deep-sea submarine. Now, there's no way to sell it, so I can only rely on renting it. The system blurted out. However, it quickly realized that it had said too much and sent a smiley emoticon instead. Of course, if the host is willing to own a deep-sea submarine that belongs solely to him for a long time, that's not impossible. For just 25 million copper coins, this deep-sea submarine that can beat all the nuclear submarines on Earth will be yours. System, you said that you used this to capture the nether shark back then? That 10th grade nether shark was also caught by this submarine? Meg didn't rush to agree, and instead asked another question. Of course, it's just a slightly bigger marine product. What's the difference? The system was a little puzzled. There's no difference. Meg's expression was a little strange. This conversation couldn't be continued. "Yeah, the seawater looks so clear. It's a pity that I don't know how to swim. Otherwise, it would be super fun to go underwater." Yabamiya also looked a little regretful. "Actually, I know how to swim, but I've always swum in the swimming pool at home. I've never tried swimming in the sea." Barbara glanced at the surface of the sea and moved in a little. This was a little different from the swimming pool in the palace. Meg saw that everyone was interested in what was under the sea. After thinking for a while, he said to the system, 99,999 copper coins is impossible. 9,999 copper coins can't be more than that. If you're willing, I'll rent your submarine the next time I come to the beach. Based on this calculation, you only need to rent it to me 2,500 times, and you'll break even. Isn't this a good deal? Wrong. Host, you're insulting the system's intelligence. How can that be? I've always loved the young. Meg raised his eyebrows. Did the system's intelligence increase? If the system wants to break even by renting the submarine 2,500 times, then the rental price for each time must be 10,000 copper coins. The price that the host has offered is already below the system's bottom line. The system said seriously, "All right, I'll give you a raise of 1 copper coin, but you have to guarantee that the equipment on your submarine to hunt nether sharks can be used. Moreover, I need to have enough authority to use it. This is to ensure the safety of the person renting it. That shouldn't be a problem, right?" Meg rolled his eyes and said with an expression as if he had suffered a great loss, "Deal." The host has the highest authority to use the submarine and has obtained the system's guarantee of safety. The system agreed readily. Mag coughed softly to interrupt the ladies' discussion and smilingly said, "If all of you really want to go into the water, there's a way. I've been researching a submarine recently, and I can give it a try with all of you." "Submarine? Where is it?" "Father, you didn't leave it at home, did you?" Amy asked curiously as she walked around Meg, but still couldn't find any submarine. The girls also looked at Meg with some confusion. A submarine that could fit everyone definitely wouldn't be small. Could it be that Meg also had a space ring on him? "No, I brought it. It's over there." Meg reached out and pointed at the surface of the water. Everyone's gaze followed the direction of his finger. The empty surface of the water was still empty. The awkward silence lasted for 2 minutes. Meg's mouth twitched, and he awkwardly retracted his finger. What kind of lousy delivery was this? The estimated time of arrival was completely inaccurate. Bullshit. He wanted a refund. Boom. Just as Meg was about to say something to ease the awkwardness, a huge metal ball in the shape of a water droplet fell from the sky and landed at the spot where Meg had pointed earlier, creating a huge splash. Chapter 1086. The wooden boat swayed violently from the waves, and everyone on the boat stared in shock at the huge piece of metal that had appeared out of thin air. Mag was also a little dumbfounded. The thing standing on the surface of the water was indeed the submarine that the system had shown him. However, compared to the picture, this gigantic object standing in front of him, which was over 30 meters tall and had a metallic sheen on its surface, was clearly more impactful. The streamlined shape of the water droplet was completely superior to the clumsy deep-sea submersibles of the past, and it gave off a hint of extraterrestrial technology. However, this shape looked a little familiar. "Wow, it's so big," Amy exclaimed. "Boss, how did you bring it here?" Yabamiya also asked in surprise. "I also borrowed a spatial ring before coming here," Meg replied casually. He had been a little rash in presenting this treasure, and it was best to keep a low profile. Fortunately, everyone's attention was attracted by the submarine, and no one paid much attention to Meg's words. Meg felt his pocket sink, and he reached out to touch it. It was an operation screen that was the size of a cell phone, and the operation method was directly transmitted to his mind by the system. "All right, we can go in now." Meg tapped on the hatch, and a door appeared on the water droplet-shaped submarine. A transparent bridge extended from the exit to the wooden boat, connecting the boat and the submarine together. "Then I'm going." Amy was the first to jump onto the transparent bridge and ran toward the submarine. The other women also stepped onto the transparent bridge with curious expressions and walked toward the hatch. This metal ball looked very high class, and even the ladder was made of crystal. Soon, only Meg and Ugly Duckling were left on the wooden boat, and it didn't dare to move. Meg looked at the glass bridge, and his expression was still calm, but his legs were already trembling uncontrollably. He was already starting to regret his decision. Why did he agree to such an unreasonable request? Wasn't that the same as pushing himself into a fire pit? Glancing at the glass bridge and the turbulent waves under the bridge, He felt as if his legs were filled with lead and were completely out of his control. Ugly duckling, you're so timid. Hurry up and come here. Don't make father wait for you. Amy stood at the cabin door with her hands on her hips with a disdainful expression. Meow. Ugly duckling meowed with an aggrieved expression. It looked up at Meg, but still didn't dare to move. Meg blushed upon hearing Amy's words. He looked at Ugly Duckling, feeling as if they were heroes. No, I can't let Amy think I'm a coward. Meg took a deep breath, picked up Ugly Duckling, and stepped onto the glass bridge. The glass bridge above the surface of the sea swayed a little. Meg looked down instinctively. Under the transparent glass, he could see the turbulent waves. The dizziness came over him again. Meanwhile, Ugly Duckling in his arms was already staring blankly at the sky. Oh no! Meg was shocked. He hurriedly closed his eyes and ran towards the submarine door with Ugly Duckling in his arms. After estimating that they were almost there, Meg opened his eyes and almost bumped into the girls who were squeezing at the cabin door. He stopped by a hair's breadth. Looking at their expressions, he laughed awkwardly and said, "Let's go in. It's cold outside." The girls turned and went in. Only then did Meg hold onto the edge of the cabin door to catch his breath. Then he wiped the cold sweat off his forehead without batting an eyelid. He stood up straight again and strode into the submarine. The interior of the submarine was surprisingly spacious. There were 2 seats in the cockpit. Apart from the 6 fixed seats in the cabin, there was also quite a lot of moving space. The interior of the submarine was mainly silver. The cool lights made the entire submarine look very sci-fi. System, you're good. Meg looked around. It was perfectly in line with his imagination of extraterrestrial technology. He couldn't help but praise it in his heart. If the host likes it, the system can reluctantly part with it and sell the submarine to the host at a price of 1 copper coin. The system will also be responsible for lifetime maintenance. The system quickly replied. It's okay. I'm pretty good renting it. Meg chuckled. No matter how good this submarine was, it would be good enough if he could drive it 250 times in his life. Why would he spend $25 million to buy it? He wasn't a fool. The cabin door closed, and the originally silver exterior of the submarine slowly became transparent. Even the ground under their feet became transparent. From the inside of the submarine, they could see everything 360 degrees without any blind spots. The view was extremely wide. Wow, awesome! Amy exclaimed softly. She lay on the edge of the cabin and looked outside with surprise. Awesome! We can actually see everything outside. It will definitely be beautiful when we go into the water. The ladies all covered their mouths. This was even more miraculous than magic. They were looking at Mag in a different light now. So, apart from being a top-notch cook, the things that Boss came up with were also very impressive. The floors suddenly became transparent. Meg's legs went weak, and he almost fell to the ground. Luckily, he held onto the chair and sat down. Meow. Ugly Duckling also let out a scream and jumped into Amy's arms. It hugged its head with both hands and buried itself. Host, look. This is the system's user-friendly design. Sitting in the submarine, you can see the underwater world 360 degrees without any blind spots. It comes with its own lights that can illuminate the sea with a radius of 1,000 meters. It's really the best tool for underwater exploration and sightseeing. Are you sure you don't want to consider it? The system continued to praise itself. Do you have to be so exaggerated? Meg rolled his eyes. He looked down carefully at the turbulent seawater below and took a few deep breaths to adjust his mentality. Since he was already in the submarine, there was no turning back. He had to go into the water now. Moreover, Meg was indeed curious about what kind of place the merfolk lived in and what kind of monsters the nether sharks were. Naturally, it was best to go into the water and see for himself. System, go to the border of Atlantis closest to the nether sharks. I want to see what kind of monsters the nether sharks are, Meg said in his heart. A location appeared on the operation screen immediately. Veril. All right, everyone, go back to your seats first. We have to prepare to set off. Meg turned around and said. Amy ran over with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She sat beside Meg in the co-pilot's seat and buckled her seatbelt automatically. After making sure that everyone was seated, Meg pressed the start button in front of him. The submarine shook slightly and then dived into the water. Town. Early this morning, the news of the Nether Shark's invasion had spread to Veril. All the residents in the town had received orders to pack their things immediately and await orders to evacuate to the capital, Evo City. Duel, that's great. We can finally go to the capital. Moreover, we don't have to hand the crescent fish over to Uncle Butler. We can eat it on the way. In a rundown little house, the young girl, Callie, grabbed Duel's hand with an excited smile on her face. In the past, the Nether Sharks only went to Rock City to avoid danger when they invaded. Why are we retreating directly to Evo City this time? This doesn't seem normal. Duel tied up his bag with a puzzled expression. Right at this moment, a sharp sound of a conch suddenly rang out from outside the town. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1087. The Nether Sharks are attacking. Duel's expression changed. The sound of the conch was the highest level of warning. It meant that the attacking Nether Sharks were very powerful. Didn't they say there were 5 more days? How did they arrive so quickly? Carly's face turned pale immediately. She knew very well how terrifying the Nether Sharks were. She thought that she would not have to worry about them after going to the capital city. She did not expect the Nether Sharks to attack before they even set off. Carly, stay at home and don't run around. I'll go check on the situation. Duel picked up the spear at the side and turned to walk out of the door. Duel. Carly reached out and grabbed the corner of Duel's shirt. Duel turned to look at her. Be careful, Carly said softly as she let go. It's not a big deal. I'll be back soon. Duel reached out and rubbed Carly's hair with a relaxed smile before turning to leave. The sound of the conch horn spread throughout Town. A pale blue light shield rose from the town and enveloped it. Hundreds of mermaid warriors gathered outside the town and looked into the dark distance with solemn expressions. Mayor, we've received news that a large nether shark is leading 2 medium-sized nether sharks towards our town. They'll be here soon. What should we do now? A merman asked anxiously as he looked at the elderly merman standing in the middle. The other mermaids also looked worried. The strongest among them, Mayor Catal, was only an 8th-tier powerhouse. Other than that, there were only 3 6th-tier mermaids in the town. The rest of the mermaids were all below 6th tier. Although Catal was of the same level as the large nether shark, the nether shark's terrifying nether whirlwind and recovery ability made it invincible among those of the same level. With Veril's defensive ability, it would not be able to last long against the 3 nether sharks. Once it lost its defense, the town would face destruction. Catal rose slowly and turned to look at the mermaid warriors. He said loudly, I've already sent the news back to Rock City and the capital city. I believe there will be reinforcements coming to support us soon. What we need to do is to hold back the 3 nether sharks before the reinforcements arrive and not let them enter Veril. Let's go. The mermaid warriors replied in unison. Their morale was instantly boosted. Around the altar, the high priest was calling out names and distributing mud casings. Every mermaid clan expert who was called out had a look of joy on their faces. They respectfully held the mud casings carefully, took a deep breath, and stepped into the waterproof space. They put the mud casings into their mouths, chewed, and swallowed. Cough, cough, cough. Hee. All kinds of choking sounds could be heard. One by one, the merfolk clutched their throats and coughed out tears, but they didn't dare to spit them out. This was the miracle medicine that Her Royal Highness had obtained from the Chosen One after going through countless difficulties and dangers. It was also the hope of the mermaid clan. Even if it was hard to swallow, they had to swallow it and pretend to be happy. Don't just eat it. Actually, it won't be that bad if you eat it with seawater. Gina quickly reminded the merfolk powerhouses as she looked at their flushed faces. When the merfolk heard that, they quickly poked their heads out and drank a big mouthful of seawater. Indeed, after soaking in seawater, the mud casings that were as hard as rocks and hard to swallow became much softer and easier to swallow. Even more miraculously, although the mud casings didn't have any taste, they turned into a warm current after swallowing it. It melted into their limbs and bones, and a strange feeling gradually appeared. Their footsteps became light, and their bodies seemed to be floating by themselves. The merfolk who were holding their breath in the waterproof space began to have a strange feeling. The air that they were originally unable to breathe began to become more comfortable. Gradually, they could even breathe in through their noses to obtain some oxygen to relieve the feeling of suffocation. This change was slow, but it was clearly visible. The high priest, the king, and the queen were the first to eat the mud casings. At this moment, they were already trying to expel the seawater around their bodies. Then, they tried to breathe air in the waterproof space. Although it was more awkward than breathing directly in water, and the air that they breathed into their bodies through their noses seemed clumsy and obstructed, this novel feeling still surprised them. The merfolk being able to breathe air was something that the ancestors of the merfolk had been dreaming about for thousands of years. However, they obtained it after consuming a piece of godly medicine. Happiness came too easily, and the merfolk felt that it was unreal. When they completely mastered this ability to breathe, they should be able to pass through the curse seal and no longer be restricted by this small seal. The ordinary merfolk also looked at the merfolk who had consumed the mud casings with glowing eyes. Although most of the merfolk present didn't have the right to consume the godly medicine for the time being, it didn't mean that they wouldn't in the future. Your Majesty, the latest news is that 3 nether sharks have invaded in advance. They have already entered the border and are heading towards Veril. At this moment, a merfolk warrior in armor came forward and reported anxiously to the king. The lively scene quieted down immediately. The excitement brought about by the godly medicine still couldn't make them ignore the threat of the nether sharks. How strong are the invading nether sharks? The king's expression also darkened. The residents of the border towns had yet to evacuate. If these 3 nether sharks were too strong, they might invade directly and cause unimaginable damage. 1 large nether shark and 2 medium-sized nether sharks. After receiving the distress signal, Rock City has already sent people to reinforce them. That merfolk quickly replied. The king pondered for a while, then said in a deep voice, "Pass down the order. Get the border troops to reinforce Veril as soon as possible. At the same time, order the residents to head towards Evo City immediately. The invasion of the nether sharks might be brought forward." "Yes," that merfolk replied and left quickly. The king walked to the high priest's side and said in a low voice, "High priest, what do you think now?" The high priest directly transmitted his voice to the king. "Let's follow the original plan and get everyone to retreat to Evo City. Although we've already found the chosen one, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for him to deal with all the nether sharks on his own. We have to make more preparations." The king nodded thoughtfully. "The nether sharks are acting strangely this time. I'll go to the border personally," the high priest said again. However, he didn't transmit his voice this time. Instead, he said it out loud. "But the chosen one is still waiting for us." "High priest." The king wanted to say something, but stopped. Compared to a small border town, meeting the chosen one was obviously more important. The effects of the godly medicine have yet to fully take effect. I estimate it'll take at least 2 hours before we can attempt to pass through the curse wall. The high priest shook his head. With a wave of his hand, 2 pale golden gems landed on a spell formation beside the altar. The golden glow was very fast. "I'll be back soon." The high priest stepped onto the teleportation portal. "High priest, I'll go with you." Gina also landed on the teleportation portal and stood respectfully at the side. Chapter 1088. Outside Veril Town, hundreds of mermen were on standby as they looked into the distance nervously. The sky was suppressed by the dark curse barrier. They could already see the turbulence caused by the 3 hurricanes in the distance. The water surface was shaking slightly. Other than the garrison, the young and strong mermen in the town had also come to the town to join the defense. All the mermen knew how terrifying the nether sharks were. It was meaningless to escape from the town. For the sake of their loved ones in the town, they could only fight with their backs against the wall. Even if they could not defeat the ferocious nether sharks, as long as they could hold on until the reinforcements from Rock City arrived, Veril Town would be saved. This was destined to be a tragic battle. They had no way out. A large nether shark only needed 2 rounds to destroy a town. That huge hurricane, with a diameter of almost 100 meters, could easily destroy all the buildings. The young Duel was standing on the wall of the town, holding a long spear tightly. The black spear looked rather old, but the tip of the spear was very sharp. This was his father's battle spear. 8 years ago, as the captain of Veril Town's guards, he and his mother, who was also a warrior, died in the mouth of the nether sharks while escorting the town's residents. They only left behind the spear. 8 years was enough to make many memories blurry, but he could not forget the scene of his mother and father being torn apart by the hurricane. He had been practicing his spear skills all these years so that he could fight the nether sharks one day and avenge his parents. Catal came to Duel and said in a low voice, "Duel, go back and protect Carly. My presence here is the best protection for her." Duel looked at Catal and said with a determined gaze, "That's a large nether shark. It's meaningless for you to stay here." Katawa frowned. He had watched this child grow up. His father was the younger generation that he thought the most highly of. How could he watch him throw away his life? Back then, my father and mother also knew that it was meaningless for them to stay, but didn't they still stay? Duel shook his head and gripped the spear in his hand tightly with a determined gaze. This child, Catal, seemed to see the shadow of the burly man back then. He was also someone who could not be persuaded once he made up his mind. He sighed and turned to leave. Then, he beckoned a warrior to keep an eye on him. "They're here." A fisherman cried out in alarm. The huge whirlwind could be clearly seen. The huge rocks that were sucked in the whirlwind were cut into countless pieces by the black-gray wind blades. The fishes swam in all directions in fear, but the whirlwind was like a vortex with a huge suction force. It sucked in the fishes crazily and then disappeared without a trace. Within the huge black-gray vortex, a huge figure could be vaguely seen. 2 smaller whirlwinds followed closely behind, sweeping all the way, leaving 3 deep ravines on the ground. It was a complete mess. The merfolk warriors paled at the sight. Although they would encounter the nether whirlwind every year, Veril had never faced such a terrifying nether shark alone. For Freyr, for our loved ones, prepare for battle, my brave warriors. Catal raised the trident in his hand and bellowed, "Fight!" The mermaid warriors shouted in unison, all of them unafraid of death. Duel also shouted with a red face. His eyes were bloodshot, and the hand holding the spear was trembling slightly. It wasn't from fear, but from excitement. "Huh!" Catal held the trident and appeared outside the protective barrier in the blink of an eye. The trident in his hand lit up with a bluish-purple glow, and he slashed at the whirlwind with all his might. A huge bluish-purple trident appeared, and then stabbed towards the huge whirlwind that was over 100 meters in diameter and height. The trident expanded with the wind and became 100 meters long in the blink of an eye. It smashed into the whirlwind with a huge stream of water. Everyone stared at the scene with their eyes wide open. Catal was the strongest among them. Only he could stop that huge nether shark. Boom! The huge trident collided with the whirlwind and made a loud noise. The unstoppable whirlwind stopped suddenly, but there were no signs of it collapsing. Although the whirlwind stopped, the madly spinning wind blades were like countless sharp blades, slashing at the huge trident. Sparks burst out, and the trident shortened at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, the trident head disappeared, followed by the long shaft. It was only a matter of time before it was completely worn down. On the other hand, the nether whirlwind only became a little thinner. The shadow in the whirlwind became more obvious, and its huge figure brought great pressure to everyone. "Let's attack together." Catal was not discouraged. The whirlwind of a huge nether shark was difficult to break, and this was within his expectations. Moreover, this nether shark should be evolving into a huge nether shark. His goal was to stall for time as much as possible. Countless spells flew out of the protective barrier like streams of light toward the 3 whirlwinds. The spells exploded outside the whirlwinds into beautiful fireworks, but the 3 whirlwinds did not move. However, under the nether whirlwind, the spells of the merfolk were completely useless. They could not even penetrate the whirlwind, let alone cause any substantial damage to the nether shark in the whirlwind. They could not even break through the outermost defense. This absolute difference made them feel hopeless. At this moment, a sharp roar came from within the hurricane. It traveled along the ripples of the water. The largest hurricane spun faster and faster. The remaining trident shattered instantly. The hurricane was unstoppable as it rolled towards Veril Town, sweeping up rocks and debris in the air. Oh no! Catal frowned. With the trident in his hand, he charged toward the whirlwind brazenly. The merfolk also had strong bodies and strength. The merfolk warriors were even more fearless. A bluish-purple glow lit up on the trident and enveloped his body. He turned into a stream of light and charged toward the whirlwind. The merfolk's spells could not break through the whirlwind. If the merfolk warriors wanted to defeat the nether sharks, they had to choose close combat. Soon, a few merfolk powerhouses rushed out of the protective barrier and charged toward the other two whirlwinds. They were responsible for holding back the two medium-sized nether sharks. The trident broke a hole in the whirlwind, and Catal entered it in a flash. The whirlwind stopped moving forward. A small figure and a huge black figure were fighting fiercely in the whirlwind. Turbulence appeared in the seawater, and sharp, angry roars could be heard from time to time. PFFF. The battle did not last long. Catal, who was covered in blood, flew out of the whirlwind with his body bent like a shrimp. He only managed to stop himself when he reached the protective barrier. He spat out a mouthful of blood and used the broken trident to stabilize himself. He stared at the nether shark that had retracted the whirlwind and revealed its huge and ferocious face. His eyes were filled with indignation. Fight to the death. The merfolk warriors' eyes were already red. Fear and despair burned into the strongest conviction. They could not win, and there was no way out. They could only fight to the death. The nether shark looked at the merfolk with its scarlet eyes, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth. This was the most delicious food of the year. They were weak, but they liked to struggle. Hunting them was even more interesting. Bang! Right at this moment, an unknown object fell from the sky and smashed onto the head of the giant nether shark. As though it was hit by a heavy hammer, the nether shark that was about to start hunting was instantly smashed into the sea, sending rocks flying everywhere. 1 heavily injured large-sized nether shark and 2 medium-sized nether sharks have been detected. Do you want to start fishing? A metallic voice sounded in the cockpit. Chapter 1089. Meg listened to the notification echoing in the cabin with a dumbfounded expression. He had just recovered from the fear of the deep sea, and the submarine stopped in the blink of an eye. Also, it seemed that they had bumped into a large nether shark. Didn't they say that nether sharks were extremely powerful, that their hurricanes were immune to all magical damage, and that their recovery abilities were extremely strong? Didn't they say that nether sharks were ferocious and cruel, the overlords of the deep sea, and the killers of mermaids? Why did it feel like they were a little weak? Meg looked down at the large black shark below. There was a huge silver whirlpool tattoo on its head, but he felt that the information he had received was a little inaccurate. Wow, what a big fish. If we make it into grilled fish, we can eat it for many, many days, right? Amy exclaimed softly, her eyes full of little stars. There are so many mermaids there. Just like Sister Gina, they have beautiful fishtails. Anna pointed in the direction of Veril Town and said in surprise, "So there are males among the mermaids, too." Everyone's words brought Meg back to reality. He thought for a while and reached out to press the confirm button in front of him. Fishing command confirmed. Target 3 nether sharks. The electronic voice sounded again. Catal and the merfolk were prepared to sacrifice their lives for Freyr, were also looking at the huge, unknown luminous object that had suddenly appeared with a shocked expression. The bright light wasn't too dazzling, but it made the huge luminous object appear particularly grand and solemn. The large nether shark that was not injured at all under the attacks of the mermaids was lying motionless in the deep pit at the bottom of the sea. The big guy that was known for its strong defense and regeneration ability was knocked unconscious so easily. Could it be that God has descended? Some mermaids exclaimed. Other than that, they could not think of any other existence that could do such a thing. So powerful. Duel, who was holding his spear and preparing to charge, opened his mouth wide as he looked at the big guy that suddenly appeared with disbelief. It was obviously not a big fish, but more like a legendary artifact drawn on an altar. Is this really God? Duel's heart began to beat violently. In addition to avenging his parents, his biggest wish was to go outside the cursed barrier that he was tired of seeing. If God really appeared, his wish might be able to come true. The High Priestess and Gina had just stepped out of the teleportation spell's range a moment before the luminous object descended from the sky. The High Priest had already raised the magic staff in his hand. Then, a beam of light descended from the sky at an unbelievable speed, knocking the nether shark into the bottom of the sea. This is a miracle. The High Priest's staff was still raised, and he looked at the object that was emitting light. His body began to tremble uncontrollably, and his wrinkled face was full of excitement. Gina was also shocked when she saw that. Even if she went all out, she could only stall the nether shark, let alone kill it in one strike. Miracle? If God himself appeared, then why did he choose Mr. Meg? She was puzzled. All the mere people present were stunned. The two medium-sized nether sharks let out a shrill cry when they saw the large nether shark being knocked unconscious. Not only did they not retreat, but they also rushed toward the submarine with a violent gust of wind. How dare you disrespect God? The High Priest's face darkened, and the magic staff in his hand glowed. Just then, the floating luminous object suddenly released two visible ripples and flew toward the two gusts of wind that was dozens of meters tall. Poof! The ripples swept past, and with a soft sound, the gust of wind that was indestructible and destructive in the eyes of the mere people instantly disintegrated, revealing the two black sharks that were more than 80 meters long in the gust of wind. The sudden disappearance of the gust of wind obviously shocked the two sharks. However, before they could react, two silver metal balls had already exploded in front of them, turning into two large silver nets that wrapped around the two nether sharks and tightened abruptly. Hiss! The two nether sharks let out a mournful cry, then sank straight to the bottom of the sea. They fell to the bottom of the sea and could not move at all. Only a pair of red eyes could still move in fear. Soon, another silver metal ball exploded above the large nether shark's head, turning into an even bigger net that trapped the nether shark. The surroundings fell silent, and all the mere people gulped. What a powerful ability! If the previous collision was a violent aesthetic, then the scene of breaking the nether whirlwind and subduing the two medium-sized nether sharks with ease was completely beyond their imagination. It even gave them the illusion that the powerful nether sharks were like weak crescent fishes in front of that luminous object. They did not even have the right to struggle. So powerful! Gina also revealed a shocked expression. This was completely beyond the scope of a battle. It looked more like a fishing operation. Their abilities were not on the same level at all. God bless Lantis. Is everything finally going to end? The High Priest slowly retracted his magic staff, tidied his clothes, and slowly swam toward that luminous object that was emitting a bright light. High Priest! Gina looked at the High Priest's back and hesitated for a while before following behind him. The nether sharks had been successfully subdued. The electronic voice sounded in the submarine cabin. Meg blinked and looked down at the three nether sharks that were completely immobilized by the silver net. His expression became a little strange as he looked down at the mere people who were staring at him with their mouths agape. This aquatic dragon from the system was a little too powerful. It was practically a deep-sea Overlord-class submarine. The nether sharks that had caused the mere people to be in a terrible state were just like slightly larger aquatic products in front of this submarine. They did not have any ability to resist at all. System, what material is that fishing net of yours made of? Are you sure it won't break free? Meg asked curiously. The fishing net is made of super nanomaterials by the system. Its strength is far beyond the nether shark's strength limit. You don't have to worry about it breaking free. However, are you sure you don't want to consider buying this aquatic dragon deep-sea submarine? With it, You can do whatever you want in this ocean. The system's proud voice sounded, and then it grabbed the opportunity to continue promoting the submarine. I'm sorry, I'm not interested. Meg rejected immediately. So powerful. In the submarine's cabin, everyone was looking at Mag in awe. Clearly, they were all stunned by the earlier scene. Elizabeth could clearly sense the ability of that large nether shark below. That was an overlord of the ocean with abilities above level 8. How could it be knocked unconscious by Meg's strange-looking submarine? Meanwhile, those two level 6 and level 7 nether sharks were also extremely difficult to deal with in the deep sea. However, they were also easily subdued by Meg. Chapter 1090. What the hell is this thing? How can a normal human unleash such terrifying power? If we were in the sea, could it be that even I would not be a match for him? Countless questions flashed across Elizabeth's mind, and all of them shocked her. Her concept of the upper limit of a normal human's ability was completely overturned at this moment. Yabamia finally closed her mouth with much difficulty. She swallowed her saliva and said, "If I remember correctly, the thing that Gina mentioned that caused Lantis to be in danger was that big shark with a hole in its head, right?" "Yes, it's exactly the same as Sister Gina's drawing." Anna nodded. Then she looked at Meg with admiration and said, "Uncle Meg, you did it. You saved this town just like in Sister Gina's drawing." "I knew it. Father is the best." Amy hugged Meg's arm happily with a proud smile on her face. She looked outside and suddenly stopped. She pointed outside with her little finger and said, "Isn't that Sister Gina? Is she here to welcome us?" Meg looked up after hearing that. Gina was following behind an old merman in a black cloak and was swimming slowly towards the submarine. Gina and that old merman stopped about 100 meters away from the glowing object. They placed their hands on their chests and bowed respectfully. "Honorable God, I am Dexter, the High Priest of Lantis, your most loyal believer. Thank you for saving the people of Lantis. It's the High Priest and Princess Gina. They're here to welcome God, right? Then let's hurry and welcome them too." The merfolk of Veril quickly noticed the arrival of the High Priest and Gina. They were surprised and hurriedly bowed respectfully in the direction of the submarine. Gina is the princess of the merfolk tribe. This old merman seems to have a higher status than Gina. However, what did he say? I don't understand at all. What should I do? Meg also heard the old merman's voice, but he couldn't understand it. Meg scratched his head. The language barrier was indeed a headache. The subsequent negotiations for the establishment of the fishery would most likely be conducted with this old mermaid. The language barrier would most likely be the biggest obstacle. After all, not every mermaid was as simple as Gina. Unknown language detected. Collecting language samples. Sufficient samples have been collected. Analyzing in progress. Language sample collection and analysis complete. Successfully deciphered and loaded into the language library. Would you like to perform simultaneous interpretation? At this moment, the electronic voice sounded again. Meg was stunned. Looking at the flashing red confirm button in front of him, his eyes lit up. He didn't expect this submarine to have language learning and simultaneous interpretation functions. However, Meg reacted quickly. He said unhappily in his heart, "System, you can fucking translate the language of the merfolk tribe a long time ago, right?" He recalled that he had been communicating with Gina using sign language every day. Simple communication required guessing and guessing. The process was extremely difficult. In the end, the system's simultaneous interpretation function solved the problem. Meg was stunned. The system said, The host didn't take the initiative to ask. Meg raised his eyebrows. Speaking of which, he had indeed forgotten the first rule of asking the system if there was a problem. What did it say just now? Father, are you hiding a little elf here? Amy looked around, trying to find where the voice came from. I think I heard simultaneous interpretation, but what is that? Yabamia asked, confused. Everyone looked at Meg. This was something created by Meg. Its unbelievable speed and ability to observe the underwater world from all angles had already amazed them. It's a small invention. Now we can understand the merfolk's language. Meg shrugged and clicked on the confirm button for simultaneous interpretation calmly. Honorable God, I am Dexter, the High Priest of Lantis, your most loyal believer. The High Priest's voice sounded again, but this time it was translated into the common language of the continent. Honorable God? Meg raised his eyebrows. This High Priest of Lantis seemed to have misunderstood something. Gina had always called him the Chosen One. It seemed like the High Priest mistook him for a god after seeing his previous actions. I can really understand it now. But Father, why did she call us Honorable God? Are we really that powerful? Amy looked at Meg strangely. That is a 10th tier great magic caster. Elizabeth looked at the High Priest softly before looking at the merfolk and that small town in the distance. She seemed to be in deep thought. She didn't expect there to be an unknown merfolk tribe in the deep sea. Furthermore, there were an unknown number of 10th tier powerhouses in the tribe. If the merfolk were to escape from the bottom of the sea, it would definitely cause a huge impact on the current order of the Norland continent. This should be someone with a higher status in the merfolk tribe. He might have misunderstood our identity. Meg looked at everyone and said, apart from sending Gina home, our other objective is to establish a supply chain for the nether shark's fins and lips. The restaurant's next dish needs these 2 ingredients, so I need the merfolk's help. Then, can't we just tell Big Sister Gina directly? She will definitely help us because she is one of us, Amy said with a smile. Yes, Gina is super nice. She will definitely provide the ingredients for the restaurant. Mia nodded. This is not something Gina can decide. Meg shook his head. He looked at the respectful High Priest outside and said, he should be the one who can make the decision. Then what do we need to do? Elizabeth asked Meg. Nether sharks were very powerful beings to the merfolk tribe. It was not a reasonable request to ask them to risk their lives to capture nether sharks for the restaurant. Gina, indeed, did not have the right to make the decision. The High Priest looked down and stood there with a respectful expression. High Priest. Gina wanted to say something after waiting for a long time, but there was no response from that glowing object. Wait quietly, the High Priest said softly as he raised his hand. Gina swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She lowered her head and kept quiet. Since he has misunderstood, then let's make this misunderstanding even deeper. A smile appeared at the corner of Meg's mouth. He pushed the lighting effect to the maximum, and then adjusted the voice changer to Sage mode. He signaled for everyone to keep quiet, and clicked on the simultaneous interpretation microphone. You don't have to be so polite. The person I have chosen is already waiting for you on the surface of the sea. He will guide you in the direction of Lantis. No pop-up window. Chapter 1091. The solemn voice traveled clearly into the ears of every merman. The High Priest raised his head. His body was trembling slightly, and his eyes were sparkling. It had been 1,000 years. Lantis had been abandoned by God for 1,000 years. Finally, God had blessed Lantis again. The High Priest prostrated himself on the ground and respectfully said, God, Lantis will serve you and the person you choose forever. Please remove this cursed barrier for 1,000 years for us, and get rid of the nether sharks that feed on the people of Lantis. Gina and the merfolk warriors of Veril also prostrated themselves on the ground, expressing their utmost respect to that holy artifact. The person I choose will help you. He's a good man. The solemn voice sounded again. The light on the artifact became even more dazzling, and then it disappeared without a trace in a flash of light. He is talking about Mr. Meg. He's really a good man. So God thinks the same way, too. Gina murmured to herself. Has God left? The merfolk raised their heads and looked at the remaining 3 nether sharks that were tightly bound. The artifact that carried God had disappeared. The High Priest slowly straightened his body and looked up at the faintly visible light that had completely disappeared. He then retracted his gaze and said to the merfolk in front of Veril Town, God is still watching over us. Lantis will be able to break free from the curse very soon. That's great. The mare folk cheered. Break free from the curse and leave the bottom of the sea. Duel also had a surprised expression on his face. He looked up at the dark barrier. He would be able to see the outside world very soon. Then, his gaze landed on the 3 nether sharks that were tightly bound. He hesitated for a while, but still mustered his courage and went forward. He looked at the high priest who was performing the healing spell on Mayor Catal and respectfully asked, "High priest, may I request to kill one of the nether sharks?" The high priest looked at Duel in surprise. "Aren't you afraid of it? They kill my parents, but I am not afraid of them. I want to kill them to avenge my parents." Duel shook his head and gripped the spear in his hand tightly as he stared at the 3 nether sharks. The high priest stared at Duer for a long time, and a smile appeared on his wrinkled face. He nodded slightly and said, "God has subdued those 3 nether sharks. I think he will agree to let you handle one of them." "Thank you, high priest." Duel was overjoyed. "You should be thanking God." The high priest took back the magic ball. Catal's injuries had already healed. "Thank you, Lord God," Duel said respectfully as he swam toward a medium-sized nether shark with his spear. A golden-red spear gleam that was half an arm's length lit up on the spear. Duel used all his strength to stab the spear into the vortex pattern above the nether shark's head. He had long heard that this was the nether shark's only weakness. The nether shark let out a shrill cry and struggled frantically. However, it was entangled by the silver fishing net and could not move an inch. The struggle did not last long. When the cries stopped, the nether shark stopped moving completely. Duel pulled out his spear, and fresh blood spurted out from the nether shark's vortex. "Father, Mother, I have avenged all of you," Duel murmured with tears streaming down his face. The residents of the town had all come out at some point. "Duel." Carly rushed out from the crowd and hugged Duel. Tears were streaming down her face as well. "You must be the mayor of Veril. Pass down the order for all the merfolk in the town to march toward Evo City," the high priest said to Catal. "Yes," Catal replied respectfully. The high priest glanced at Duel and the nether shark that had stopped moving. A smile of admiration appeared at the corner of his mouth. "That little fellow is a good seedling. If he is willing, let him join the garrison directly after going to Evo City. Just say that I asked him to go." Catal's face lit up. He nodded and said, "I think that little fellow will be very willing." "Gina, let's go," the high priest said, and a faint golden array formation started to appear under his feet. Gina stepped into the range of the array formation. A golden light flashed, and the 2 of them disappeared. "Gina, tell me in detail about that chosen one. The future of Lantis is in his hands." "Mr. Meg, he is a good person." The submarine accelerated instantly and left the bottom of the sea. It only started to slow down when it reached a depth of about 5,000 meters and slowly rose to the surface. "Father, did you lie to them just now?" Amy blinked and looked at Meg with a shocked expression. It was her first time seeing her father lie. Everyone in the submarine looked at Meg with a surprised expression. In their impression, Meg had always been an honest and steady person. This is not a lie. It is just to build a stable and strong friendship between both parties. Meg shook his head and seriously said, "Am I not a good person?" Everyone thought about it and suddenly understood. Of course, Mr. Meg was a good person. Thinking about it this way, he was indeed not lying. "I knew father would not lie." A bright smile appeared on Amy's face. Meg heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. As a role model for Amy to learn from, this honest persona could not be broken. Moreover, he did not do anything outrageous. He just took the opportunity to make the following negotiations easier. He would also do his best to help Lantis. A large school of fish swam past the submarine. Ugly Duckling, who was already used to it, lay in front of the transparent window and stretched out its claws, trying to catch those fish that were approaching. Its claws scratched the glass anxiously. "Ugly Duckling, do you want to let you out?" Amy asked with a smile as she went up to it. Ugly Duckling nodded first, but quickly reacted. It turned to look at Amy with a bitter expression. "Are you the devil?" Meg looked at the beautiful scenery at the bottom of the sea through the transparent submarine. He used the fishing equipment to catch a few more fish that looked delicious or pretty. He estimated that the mare folk should be coming up soon, so he steered the submarine to the surface and returned to the wooden boat. Mr. Meg is God's spokesperson and also Lantis' savior. We have to give him the highest respect and treatment. In the center of the altar, the high priest looked at the mare folk standing in front of the altar with a serious expression. Yes, the mare folk replied in unison. Their expressions were not ambiguous at all. Previously, the high priest had already shown everyone the scene of God descending and easily subduing the 3 nether sharks. Now, there was only worship in the merfolk's hearts. The king also went up and solemnly said to everyone, "The future of Lantis is entrusted to all of you." Chapter 1092. Dong dong dong. Woo woo woo. Not long after Meg and the rest arrived on the wooden ship, and before they could start the second round of the feast, a series of orderly drumming and conch sounds could be heard. The seawater in front of the wooden ship parted, and the high priest in black mage robes stood in the middle with Gina. 300 mare people, powerhouses, slowly rose from the water. "They're here." Meg's eyes lit up. He bought the simultaneous translation system for the Lantis language with the system for 250 copper coins. From now on, he could communicate with the mare people without any obstacles. However, what the hell was this extravagance? Meg looked at the mare people who were lined up neatly and holding all kinds of strange-looking musical instruments in their hands. Did Gina give all the mud casings to the merpeople's honor guard? Wow, it's so majestic. Amy opened her eyes wide as she looked at the mare people who were playing attentively. Everyone on the wooden ship was shocked when they saw this scene. What a powerful lineup. Elizabeth's cold eyes revealed a hint of surprise. This was not an ordinary honor guard. Other than the high priest, there were 10 10th tier magic casters in the team, and the rest were mostly 8th tier and 9th tier powerhouses. Such strength had even surpassed the goblins and dwarves. Meg actually also sensed the strength of these mare people. Other than being shocked, he also had some new ideas in his mind. A force that had not shown itself for thousands of years. A powerful race that no one knew about. If he could make use of them, they might become a super powerful trump card for him. "Mr. Meg." Gina smiled at Meg, and then whispered to the high priest beside her, "High priest, that is Mr. Meg. That cute little girl is his daughter, Amy. The other beautiful ladies are the waitresses in the restaurant." The chosen one. The high priest looked at Meg first. He had seen this human in the Revelation half a month ago. Now that he saw him in person, he seemed to be just an ordinary human. He did not sense any magical aura from him, but he had a very unique temperament that made him impossible to ignore. Then, his gaze fell on Amy, and his pupils shrank as a look of amazement appeared in his eyes. A 4-year-old 6th tier, half-elf magus. There was actually such a genius in this world. Then, his gaze swept across the people on the ship. An 8th tier frost dragon, a 7th tier spatial magician. Just as Gina had said, the strength of the waiters in this restaurant was enough to make people take notice of them. This made him think even more highly of Mag. He was indeed the chosen one of God's chosen ones. The high priest bowed slightly and gratefully said to Meg, "Greetings, Mr. Meg. I am the high priest of Lantis, Dexter. Thank you for saving Gina and coming all the way here to give us the miracle medicine." Gina glanced at Meg and said softly, "High priest, Mr. Meg doesn't understand our language. Do you need me to? You don't have to be so polite, high priest. Perhaps this is all fate. Miss Gina has also helped my restaurant a lot," Meg said in fluent Lantistian language with a smile. Looking at Gina, whose mouth was slightly agape with a look of disbelief, Meg explained, "I can understand Lantistian language now. This must be an ability bestowed by God." The high priest's eyes lit up. Lantis had been isolated from the outside world for thousands of years. They didn't know the language of the outside world, and the people of the outside world naturally didn't know Lantistian language either. This made him even more certain that Meg, who was God's spokesperson, had received an unbelievable ability from God. His expression became even more respectful. Gina obviously thought so too. She looked at Meg with stars in her eyes. He was indeed Mr. Meg. He was indeed very impressive. Meg looked at the high priest's expression and had a general idea of how to proceed with the negotiation. The bluff that he took advantage of earlier had received a very good response. Father can speak the mermaid language too? Amy looked at Meg curiously. Everyone on the ship was also surprised. It was already surprising enough that Meg's little invention could convert the merfolk's language into the continent's common language. Now, he could even speak the merfolk's language. Could this be a new invention of his? High Priest, let them stop the music first. Meg looked at the High Priest with a smile. Although the merfolk's music was sonorous and very refreshing, such sonorous music didn't seem very suitable for a negotiation. Stop. The High Priest raised his hand, and the music stopped immediately. The merfolk put down the drum and conch in their hands, and looked at Meg with gratitude. After all, they were one of the few powerhouses among the merfolk. Their abilities were all above the 8th tier. It was a little embarrassing for them to play the drums and gongs here. After the music stopped, Meg looked at the High Priest and went straight to the point. Regarding Lantis' predicament, Gina had already told me before I came, and I also received some special revelations from that person. I can help Lantis solve the problem of the curse barrier and the nether sharks. However, in return, I also need some help and some promises from Lantis. The High Priest's eyes lit up. It must be a revelation from God. He was full of confidence that Meg could solve Lantis' survival predicament. As long as Lantis could survive, any condition could be negotiated. Mr. Meg, what do you need Lantis to do? What kind of promises do you need us to make? Please tell us. We will try our best to cooperate, the High Priest said. First condition, Lantis has to promise not to invade the continent and participate in the fight for territory within 100 years. Second condition, after Lantis escapes, you have to help me do 3 things unconditionally. The details are still undecided, but I can guarantee that Lantis will not pay an unacceptable price. Third condition, I need Lantis' help to build a deep-sea nether shark fishery and provide a fixed amount of nether shark's lips and fins for my restaurant. I will discuss the construction and daily operation of the fishery with you in detail later. Meg looked at the High Priest and smilingly said, My conditions are as stated above. I hope the High Priest can consider it carefully. The High Priest was deep in thought after hearing that. The other merfolk powerhouses were also deep in thought. Meg stood at the side with a calm expression, waiting for their decision. The High Priest communicated with a few of them briefly through voice transmission. After a moment of silence, he looked at Meg and solemnly said, If Mr. Meg can guarantee that Lantis will never be harassed by the nether sharks, and that every citizen can pass through the cursed barrier freely, I can promise the 3 conditions you mentioned on behalf of Lantis. Chapter 1093. The fact that all of you are able to stand here and talk to me means that you can confirm that I can indeed give you the ability to pass through the cursed barrier. However, there are many people in Lantis, and the amount of mud casings I can provide is limited. Therefore, I cannot promise how long it will take for all the merfolk in Lantis to obtain this freedom. Meg looked at the High Priest and also solemnly said, However, I can guarantee that from today onwards, the people of Lantis will not be harassed by the nether sharks. Lantis will always remember your kindness. The High Priest placed his hand in front of his chest and bowed. Gina and the mermaids bowed as well. You're welcome. This is God's guidance. A smile appeared on Meg's face. It was a very successful negotiation. He had successfully established a supply chain for the nether shark's fins and lips. More importantly, he had obtained the promise of help from a powerful race 3 times. This was a surprise army with more than 10 10th-tier powerhouses. This would become one of his most powerful trump cards. Furthermore, no one in this world knew of the existence of such a powerful race. A smile also appeared on the High Priest's face. This was indeed God's guidance. From today onwards, Lantis was going to open a new chapter. Without the harassment of the nether sharks, they had a clear hope for the outside world. That's great. Mr. Meg is really a good person. Gina's smile was also very bright. Although she didn't expect Mr. Meg to raise those 3 requests, the outcome was perfect. The negotiation was also very successful. Lantis had obtained a better result than expected. The others on the wooden boat were dumbfounded the whole time. They didn't know what Meg and the High Priest were talking about. However, when they saw the merfolk greeting Meg and both parties smiling, they also smiled. It seemed like the negotiation was very successful. It feels like the negotiation was very successful. Boss is actually so good at negotiation. Yabamiya mumbled softly. Of course. Father is super awesome, Amy said proudly. Her little face was full of pride. Meg took out a pen and paper and wrote 2 contracts on water-resistant paper. Then, he and the High Priestess signed the contracts separately. The negotiation came to a successful conclusion. It's a pleasure working with you. Meg extended his hand to the High Priest. The High Priest was slightly taken aback. It seemed that this was the social etiquette of humans. After some hesitation, he reached out his hand and gently shook Meg's hand. I look forward to working with you. After signing the contract, Meg began to hand over the magnetic field interference release ball and the ultrasonic isolation wall that the system had prepared. The former was used to destroy the nether shark's nether whirlwind and create an opportunity for the merfolk to engage in close combat with the nether shark. Knowing the nether shark's fatal weakness, the mermaids were not afraid to fight the nether shark without its tornado defense. The latter's function was to use the ultrasonic balls to release ultrasonic waves so that the nether sharks could not get close to the area surrounded by the sound wave wall. Thus, they could easily build a defensive fortress or build a deep-sea fishery. There were only 2 buttons on the switch, and it was easy to operate. Is this the divine weapon that made the nether shark's whirlwind ineffective? The High Priest held the magnetic field ball with both hands as if he was looking at an extremely precious treasure. You can say that. Meg nodded. He still felt a little guilty about pretending to be a god. God, you're too generous. The High Priest's expression was full of respect and gratitude. The number of magnetic field balls is limited. However, after releasing them, the whirlwind of the nether sharks within a radius of 1,000 meters will be dispelled. It should be enough if you use it together with a small team. The number of ultrasonic balls is sufficient for you to set up in important cities and towns to form a defensive fortress. When the nether sharks invade, you can retreat into the fortress to recuperate and wait for the nether sharks to leave. I've already confirmed the location of the nether shark fishery. It's in that big canyon. You can lure a sufficient number of nether sharks into the canyon or capture them and throw them into the canyon. Then, you can use the ultrasonic wall to block the gap in the canyon. This is the map of the canyon's location and the layout of the ultrasonic balls. I'm rearing the nether sharks to obtain their shark fins and shark lips. Meg continued to teach the High Priest the layout method, the construction of the nether shark's deep-sea farm, and the construction of the industrial chain in detail. These were all things that the system had prepared long ago. Meg was only a lobbyist, so it was very simple. The High Priest, who was always calm, got more and more excited as he listened. When Meg was done, he looked at Meg with some surprise and said, "Mr. Meg is too thoughtful. With these divine weapons, the people of Lantis won't have to worry about being harassed by the nether sharks anymore. Furthermore, they can turn the tables and treat them as prey." The nether sharks are also considered a rare species. I still hope that the merfolk of Lantis can restrain themselves a little. Meg thought to himself. Of course, he wouldn't say that out loud. For the past 1,000 years, the nether sharks had almost driven Lantis to extinction. Countless merfolk had died in the mouths of the nether sharks. Persuading others to be magnanimous was something he couldn't do. The High Priest used a crystal ball to store the tens of thousands of metal balls that Meg took out into the crystal ball. It seemed like it was also a storage equipment with a huge space. Mr. Meg, thank you for everything that you have done for Lantis. The invasion of the nether sharks is imminent, and I need to return to Lantis immediately to make arrangements. I will bid farewell to you for today. I will definitely visit you personally to thank you in the future." The high priest kept the divine weapons. He was concerned about Lantis, so he prepared to bid farewell to Meg and the rest. Gina wanted to say something, but stopped. She looked at the high priest and finally chose to remain silent. Meg saw everything. He looked at the high priest with a smile and said, "High priest, now that we have established a cooperative relationship, it is not very convenient for me to come to Lantis. Someone needs to deliver the medicine that allows your people to pass through the strong curse. Someone also needs to deliver the dried shark's fin and shark's lips that you have harvested. I wonder if you can send someone to stay in my restaurant permanently?" The high priest looked at Gina thoughtfully. He nodded with a smile and said, "Of course. Princess Gina has been with Mr. Meg for a period of time. She is also the most powerful person among the younger generation in Lantis. She will definitely be able to ensure the safety of the medicine and ingredients. I wonder if it is possible to arrange for her." Gina's eyes lit up. She looked at Meg nervously. She didn't know if Mr. Meg was still willing to let her stay. "If Miss Gina is willing, that would naturally be the best," Meg said with a smile as he looked at Gina. "I am willing." Gina almost blurted out with a happy smile on her face. Chapter 1094. The high priest looked at Gina and sent a voice transmission. "Gina, assist Mr. Megwell. Don't call yourself a princess. He is Lantis' benefactor." Gina nodded. How would she call herself a princess? As long as she could stay in the restaurant and beside Mr. Meg, she was willing to be a waitress in the restaurant. Looking at the smiling Meg, she felt as sweet as honey in her heart. So, Mr. Meg was willing to let her stay. Could it be that he has feelings for me, too? "Mr. Meg, farewell." The high priest looked at Meg and nodded slightly at the people on the wooden boat. His gaze paused when it landed on Amy. He thought for a while and took out a small blue crystal in the shape of a water droplet. He waved his hand gently, and the small crystal became a small bracelet with a red string. The high priest handed the bracelet to Amy with a smile and said, "This is a water-repellent bead. Young lady, you will be able to move freely underwater with it. This is a small gift. Take it as a meeting gift." One adorable young lady. She's just like a little goddess from heaven. This is a great gift. Meg's eyes lit up, and he quickly got Amy to thank him. What a beautiful little bracelet. "Thank you, Grandpa Merman," Amy said happily as she accepted the bracelet. Amy took the bracelet and said happily. She immediately put the bracelet on her hand and looked at the small water droplet against the sunlight. There was a small fish inside, and it seemed to be swimming in the sunlight. "This bracelet that Grandpa Merman gave you can let you breathe underwater. Then you will be like a fish," Meg said to Amy. "Really? Then won't I become a little fish? Will I also become a little mermaid?" Amy's eyes lit up, and she asked curiously, You can say that." Meg nodded with a smile. After waving goodbye to the high priest and the merfolk powerhouses, Meg turned to look at the dumbfounded ladies and announced, "Gina will continue to stay in the restaurant." "Gina is not leaving." "That's great," Mia exclaimed in surprise. Then she hugged Gina, who had just transformed into a pair of legs, and stepped onto the wooden boat. Smiles appeared on everyone's faces. Sally and Shirley had left one after another, which made them feel rather sad. If Gina were to leave as well, then they would definitely be sad for a while longer. "Thank you all," Gina said with a smile. She could feel everyone's love for her. This feeling moved her and made her happy. Meow, ugly duckling suddenly popped its head out from the corner and called out to Gina. It licked its teeth as if it was quite happy too. "Oh!" Gina was shocked and almost fell into the water from the side of the boat. Everyone burst into laughter. It was only noon, and Meg wasn't in a hurry to return. He took out the seafood that he had caught when he came up and started a new round of seafood party. After having a sumptuous seafood feast, Meg and the rest rested on the boat for a while. Just as they were about to return, the surface of the sea surged, and two mermaids came out of the water with a wooden box. They looked at Meg and respectfully said, "Mr. Meg, The high priest asked us to send a sample of the nether shark's fin, and shark's lips. Do they meet your requirements? Meg took the wooden box and opened it. There was a set of crystal clear shark's fin and a fresh shark's lip between the crushed ice. The cut was very precise. Very good. Just cook according to this standard. Meg nodded with satisfaction. The merfolk were really efficient. He liked it. Ding! Congratulations, host. You have successfully found a suitable shark's fin and shark's lip supplier and established a stable supply chain. You have taken an important step on the path to becoming the god of cookery. Mission reward calculation, 0. 5 strength points obtained. At this moment, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Perfect. Meg's eyes lit up. With this 0. 5 strength point, he could officially advance to grade 8. Grade 8 was a watershed level. Only when one's strength reached grade 8 could he be considered a true high-level combat power. After a knight's strength reached grade 8, he could cut a huge rock that was as thick as 3 people hugging it. His speed and explosive power were even stronger than a cheetah's. Coupled with his movement techniques, he could come and go without a trace. And for Meg, the most important thing was that he could finally use the real combat skills in his mind. A magician's domain, a knight's combat skills. These were the abilities that both obtained after entering the high level. Combat skills had already surpassed the category of martial skills. They also differed according to the individual knight, and there was an obvious differentiation. Some knights' combat skills obtained the ability to attack from a distance, such as a long-range blade attack, and some strengthened their combat skills, such as straight face equals blade energy plus 49m equals. Alex's combat skills were more special. After all, there was no other knight as flashy as him in this world. He chose to strengthen his sword. It seemed simple and brainless, but it made the maneuverability of the sword extremely powerful. And because of that, he had also derived countless wonderful ways to use the sword. For example, flying swords. Of course, he didn't cultivate immortality. Instead, he used his terrifying control and combat skills to control the longsword, allowing his sword to obtain a certain flying sword effect. This method was a bit like darts, but more mysterious. Of course, he rarely used this method, and very few people knew about it, but it was indeed flashy. Forcefully suppressing the agitation in his heart, Meg indicated to the system that he wasn't in a hurry to transcend the tribulation. He smiled as he bade farewell to the 2 mermaids and closed the icebox. He would be able to officially make the first pot of Buddha jumps over the wall tomorrow if he brought the shark's fin and shark's lips back. Naturally, there was no reason to waste them. All right, we've been out for a day. It's time for us to go back. Meg stopped Amy, who was about to throw Ugly Duckling into the sea after tying the water-repelling pearl around its neck, and said to everyone with a smile, "Meow, meow, meow." Ugly Duckling reached out its 2 little paws and hugged Meg's arm as if it was grabbing onto its last life-saving straw. Its eyes were filled with fear. It's okay, Ugly Duckling. With this water-repelling pearl, you can breathe in the water like a fish. You can only be considered a qualified duck after you learn how to swim. Amy pinched Ugly Duckling's fat face and said disdainfully, "Otherwise, what's the difference between you and a pig?" Meow. Ugly Duckling meowed aggrievedly. It looked at its fat tummy and didn't dare to say anything. All right, let's swim again next time. We should go home. Meg saved Ugly Duckling with a smile. He understood Ugly Duckling's fear of the sea very well. Amy thought for a while, nodded, and softly murmured, "All right, then we'll swim again after we go back. The fountain in the square is pretty good." Meow. Ugly Duckling, who thought it had escaped a calamity, rolled its eyes and fainted in Meg's arms. Everyone packed their things and boarded the frost dragon that Elizabeth had transformed into to set off for home. They parked the wooden boat that was handmade by Phyllis on an isolated island nearby. They could still use it the next time they went out for a trip. What an interesting day. Mia opened her arms and said happily. Chapter 1095. The night was getting darker. Rodu, the famous gourmet magazine, How magazine was still brightly lit at this moment. Under its banner were Food Forest, Carnivore, Vegetarianism, and many other best-selling magazines. It could be said to be the #1 magazine in the gourmet world. The chief editor, Gino, was pacing back and forth in his office. The sales results for this issue would be out very soon, and it would determine the fate of How magazine. Under the many glorious halos, only Gino and a few editors from How knew that the magazine was facing a situation of layoffs and closure as the sales of a few top magazines dropped drastically. Although food was the most important thing to the people, Rodu's gourmet delicacies were almost all written out. Rodu was known as a gourmet paradise, but no matter how beautiful a paradise was, there would eventually come a time when one would get sick of it. When those beloved gourmets started to cook the same old dishes and could no longer dig out gourmet delicacies from the streets and alleys, How magazine would inevitably enter a downward phase. As the chief editor, Gino had thought of many ways before. He even requested those food critics who submitted articles to come up with something new in order for their articles to be published in the magazine. However, those articles that were barely pieced together or even fabricated did not increase the sales. Instead, it greatly damaged the reputation that the magazine had built up over the decades. The entire industry was facing a harsh winter, and How magazine was feeling the extreme cold. Chief editor. At this moment, a young man pushed open the door of the office and rushed in directly. Gino was not bothered by the young man's recklessness. He quickly took 2 steps forward, looked at the young man nervously, and asked, "How is it? How are the sales of Food Forest and Carnivore?" These 2 magazines were How magazine's trump cards. If these 2 magazines did not reach the financial group's target of 50,000 sales for the latest issue of the magazine in Rodu, How magazine would transform into an adult-oriented magazine. He had been an editor at How for 30 years and followed How step by step from an intern editor to the most influential gourmet magazine. How could he allow such a thing to happen? If this month's magazine could not reach the target, and he had no way to reverse the decision of the financial group behind the magazine, then it would be time for him to leave. Food Forest sold 12,000 copies. Carnivorous Doctrine sold 18,000 copies. The young man said while panting, 30,000. Is it still not enough to reach the target? Gino staggered 2 steps back with a disappointed expression. Although there was a significant increase compared to the previous month, there was still a huge gap between 30,000 volumes and the agreed-upon target of 50,000 volumes. When a magazine was at its peak, the sales volume of Carnivore Doctrine alone could reach 50,000 copies, which was the best in the industry. But now, it was impossible for a single book to sell more than 50,000 copies. He knew that people still loved food because it had been too long since there was a surprising food in text. Gino's gaze dimmed. He reached out and gently patted this young man who had just joined the job with a gourmet dream. He did not know how to comfort him. Perhaps from today onwards, he would be in charge of those pornographic magazines. Chief editor, this issue of Vegetarianism has been reprinted 10 times. The sales volume in the Rodu market alone has exceeded 100,000 copies, and the distributors are still requesting for more copies. We have exceeded our target, the young man said agitatedly as he finally caught his breath. Gino, who had decided to say something, was stunned by the young editor's words before he could even open his mouth. What did you say?" Gino said in disbelief as he grabbed the young editor's shoulders. Although Vegetarianism was also one of How's well-known magazines, its sales volume was only 10,000 copies at its peak due to its small audience. Now, it was all supported by the head vegetarian gourmet, Derek. The sales volume of the new issue every month was stable at around 5,000 copies. How could it suddenly soar to 100,000 copies? That young editor repeated again. The sales volume of the latest issue of Vegetarianism has exploded. The sales volume in the Rodu market has already reached 100,000 copies, and the distributors are still urging for more copies. The total sales volume is estimated to reach 150,000 copies. Or even more, 150,000 copies Gino murmured as he sat down on the sofa behind him. His expression was still a little dazed. When Hal was at its peak, the monthly sales volume of Carnivorous Doctrine in the Rhoda market was 72,000 copies. It left a deep mark in the history of gourmet magazines and was almost set as the peak that could never be surpassed. But now, the niche vegetarianism had already reached 100,000 copies, and it wasn't over yet. It might even reach a terrifying 150,000 copies. Is this crazy? Gino muttered to himself. No one would dare to lie about such things. This data was definitely correct. Vegetarianism was definitely going to be the sales champion this month, and it would definitely be the peak that caught the attention of the entire industry. It's crazy. That young editor was also agitated. When he first received this report, he wasn't any better than the chief editor was now. The printing factory is already reprinting day and night, but there's still no way to meet the supply. There are even readers who directly shouted that it's fine even if they only print Derek's gourmet review. Chief editor, what should we do now? Derek. Gino's eyes lit up. He stood up and flipped through the pile of manuscripts on the table. He pulled out a sample manuscript from the bottom, and it was signed by Derek. In order to go all out to increase the sales volume, he had put all his energy into the top 2 magazines this month. The other magazines were finalized by the few deputy chief editors. The final draft of Vegetarianism had also been sent to his desk before, but he had ignored it. The best vegetarian dish of the year, a work that reinvigorates one's worldview. An unexpected harvest from Chaos City. Eggplant with garlic. Gino read the main and subtitles softly, and his eyes were filled with surprise. He and Derek were old friends, and he was most familiar with Derek's low-profile character and strict and simple writing style. He didn't expect him to use such a title that didn't suit his usual style. Chaos City also has delicacies? Gino muttered to himself before continuing to read. I've been invited by the president of Chaos City's Food Association to head to Chaos City. As he continued reading those familiar and simple words, Gino's expression gradually lit up. Those words seemed to have some kind of magical power. A delicious eggplant with garlic seemed to really appear before him. Then, as Derek picked up a piece of eggplant and put it into his mouth. Chapter 1096. Gulp. When Gino put down the manuscript in his hand, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. As a senior food editor who had been in the industry for 30 years, he hadn't been moved by words describing delicacies for a long time. But today, after reading Derek's article, a strong desire arose in him. He wanted to taste the eggplant with garlic sauce himself and see if it was really as delicious and tempting as Derek had described. Even a table full of sumptuous meat dishes was not worth mentioning in front of the eggplant with garlic sauce. These are words with soul, a real food review article. Gino praised. Gino praised before grabbing a handful of his hair in frustration. Why didn't I discover such a good article earlier? If I had discovered it earlier and carried out the publicity in advance, the sales might have increased by a lot. Isn't that so? The first printing of Vegetarianism was only 5,000 copies, and it gradually became popular because of word of mouth from readers. There was almost no publicity at all. This is simply a miracle in the history of magazines, the young editor said with a nod. Gino closed the manuscript in his hand and said with a determined gaze, since our own printing company can't keep up with the progress, then find another 2 printing companies to start work at the same time and print this issue of Vegetarianism. We have to continue the miracle of this food magazine and let the entire industry see hope. All right, the young editor replied. He placed the report on the table and left the office quickly. Derek and this Mamie's are simply Hal's saviors. After I'm done here, I have to thank them personally, Gino said with a smile. He picked up the report on the table and looked at it seriously for a while. Then, he took the report and a folder and left the chief editor's office quickly. Rodu, the palace. A resplendent palace. The pink and gold colors were almost proportional, making the entire palace look very pink and adorable. A young girl dressed in luxurious clothes was lying on the bed, reading the latest issue of Vegetarianism with great interest. After a long time, she put down the magazine in her hand. Hearing her stomach growling, a pained expression appeared on her exquisite face. She turned over and pressed the magazine against her stomach. With a look of despair, she said, "Oh my God, why did you make me read this in the middle of the night? It's already the 36th time, but why am I still so hungry after watching it?" "Princess Vanessa, it's time for you to go to bed," the young maid standing beside the bed said with a smile. Princess Vanessa sat up on the bed and looked at the maid with a worried expression. "Laura, I want to eat something. The queen has instructed that you cannot eat anything before you sleep." Laura looked at the princess who was lying on the bed and shook her head helplessly. "Can I just have one piece of candy?" Just a small piece will do." Vanessa stretched out her little finger. "The queen said that you can't eat sweets until your teeth are healed." Laura shook her head. She looked at the black hole in Princess Vanessa's teeth and felt her heart ache. Princess Vanessa was the king's only daughter. She had inherited the queen's beauty and was already a little beauty at the age of 16. However, her teeth had a lot of decay because she often ate sweets before she slept. It was fine if she didn't show her teeth, but when she smiled, her mouth was full of rotten teeth like that of a 70 or 80-year-old woman, completely ruining her temperament. Magic casters had a way to repair her teeth, but the treatment was too long. Furthermore, Princess Vanessa often ate sweets, so the treatment was very mediocre. Because of this, Princess Vanessa didn't attend any public gatherings since she was 14 years old. She locked herself in her bedroom every day. Occasionally, she would go to the manor in the suburbs for vacation, but only had one maid, Laura, to serve her. Over the years, her greatest interest was reading all kinds of gourmet magazines. The king doted on her, and as long as she wanted to eat something, he would invite a chef to the palace to cook it for her. The queen had already given Laura an order. She had to keep an eye on the princess and stop her from eating sweets. Otherwise, she would be severely punished. Vanessa stared at Laura for a while before lying back on the bed. She knew about the queen's order. She couldn't bear to see Laura being punished because of her. "Laura, do you think that eggplant with garlic sauce is really that delicious? I've been dreaming about it for the past few days. I really want to go to Chaos City to try it for myself." Vanessa lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling that was inlaid with luminous pearls that emitted soft light. "It must be very delicious if it can make the princess miss it so much." Laura smiled and said, "I heard that Mr. Meg won the title of the best chef during the king's birthday celebration. Every dish he made was highly praised by the king. I regret it so much. Why did I go to the suburbs for a vacation those few days? I feel like I missed out on a delicious feast." Vanessa kicked her legs with a despondent look on her face. Laura covered her with a blanket carefully and smilingly said, "If the princess really wants to eat it, you just have to tell His Majesty, and he will definitely invite Mr. Meg over from Rodu to make you a delicious eggplant with garlic sauce." "Really?" Vanessa's eyes lit up and a smile appeared on her face. "All right, then I'll go look for His Majesty tomorrow and ask him to invite Mr. Meg to the palace." Meg finally coaxed the two little ones to sleep. He tiptoed out of the room and walked to the balcony. He had a bountiful trip to the sea today. Not only did he obtain an army, but he also obtained a strength point as a reward. The opportunity to break through to the 8th tier was right in front of him. Meg was obviously not someone who could keep his cool. He went to the balcony and closed the door carefully. After that, Meg took off his bathrobe and put it aside. He walked to the center of the balcony and heaved a sigh of relief. Then he opened his arms and said in his heart, "System, I'm ready. We can begin." Boom! An explosion suddenly erupted in the sky. 8 bolts of lightning twisted together to form a lightning pillar and fell on Meg's head. The lightning illuminated the balcony, and Meg, who was only wearing a pair of shorts, was bathed in the lightning. His muscles and bones seemed to have become transparent and were being torn apart and reconstructed in a frenzy under the lightning. 3 minutes later, the lightning finally dissipated. Meg, who felt as if a century had passed, suddenly opened his eyes. He clenched his fists and could feel a special internal force flowing through his body. He could easily control it with his mind. Is this what it feels like to break through to the eighth tier? A smile appeared on Meg's face. It was a familiar, yet unfamiliar feeling. Chapter 1097. Harold opened his eyes as he heard the loud crow of a rooster. He instinctively turned his head to look at the magic clock hanging on the opposite side of the bed. It was already 6:30 am. Shit, I'm going to be late. Harold's sleepiness disappeared instantly, and he got out of bed. He pulled his pajamas off, picked up the clothes beside the bed, and put them on. Doris was woken up by the rustling sound. She rubbed her sleepy eyes as she sat up. She looked at Harold, who was almost fully dressed, and asked in confusion, "Harold, what are you doing? Isn't it your day off today?" "Day off?" Harold, who was about to walk out of the door, paused. He smacked his head and laughed awkwardly. "I drank too much yesterday. I forgot that it's my day off today. Doris, I'm sorry to wake you up so early." "It's all right. You've been too tired recently. I should have reminded you last night." Doris stood up and hugged Harold gently. Her slender fingers massaged his temples gently, and her heart ached for him. Harold closed his eyes and enjoyed his wife's shiatsu massage to ease the headache caused by his hangover. He was the sales director of a furniture company. Because the sales target for the second half of the year did not meet the requirements, he had to go to the office at 6 a.m. almost every day for the past few months. He would drink with his clients until late at night before returning home. Although his income was not low, the high-intensity work and pressure also made him mentally and physically exhausted. Fortunately, he had finally settled the deal with the big client last night. The sales target for the second half of the year was also achieved in advance because of this deal. He could relax a little now. The warm fingertips massaged his forehead gently. It was so comfortable that Harold wanted to lie down again and go back to sleep. "Since you're already up, let's go out for breakfast," Doris said gently. "Breakfast?" Harold opened his eyes and yawned. He shook his head and said, "I don't have an appetite now. I just want to have a good sleep. Besides, you know that I never eat breakfast." Doris looked into Harold's eyes and said gently, "You promised Kathy to take her out for good food. You've been too busy with work these few months. She mentioned it to me a few times, but I didn't tell you." Harold looked at Doris and suddenly realized that he had been busy with work and neglected his family for the past few months. She had to take care of the entire family alone, and she also had to take care of the children. She definitely had it no easier than him. He suddenly felt a little guilty. "I'm afraid there's nothing good for breakfast. Why don't we go out for lunch and dinner?" Harold grabbed Doris' hand and placed it gently on his face. He said gently, "I haven't had a meal with you in a long time. Let's go to Dukas Restaurant." That was the place where they pledged their love. Every year on that day, they would go together as a family. But this year, because he was too busy with work, he didn't bring her along. "I promised Kathy that I would take her to Aiden Square this morning." Doris shook her head slightly. She looked at Harold worriedly and said, "The doctor said your gastro problem can't be ignored anymore. If you don't eat breakfast, it will continue to worsen. I heard there's a restaurant called Mamie in the square that's not bad. Let's go and try it." Harold didn't care about his gastro problem. He could endure the occasional pain, and it had nothing to do with breakfast. His mouth was dry now, and his head was a little dizzy. He was resisting breakfast from head to toe. However, looking at Doris's expression, he couldn't bear to reject her. He nodded with a smile and said, "All right, let's pack up and get ready to go out." Soon, the family of three went out. The little girl, who was 7 or 8 years old, held the hands of the two adults. "Dr. Matthew, are you back from your morning exercise so early?" The family met an old man who was doing morning exercise as soon as they stepped out of the door. Harold greeted him with a smile. This was their neighbor, a famous doctor in Chaos City. Dr. Matthew stopped in his tracks and said to Harold with a frown, "Harold, you don't look too good. Did you drink a lot last night?" Harold glanced at Doris and shook his head with a smile. "I did drink a little last night, but it should be because I've been too tired recently. It's nothing." "Dr. Matthew, please take a look at him. He vomited when he came back last night. There was blood in his vomit," Doris said worriedly. Kathy, who had her hair tied up in a ponytail, also looked at Dr. Matthew and pleaded, "Grandpa Matthew, please take a look at Father." Dr. Matthew stared at Harold for a while and solemnly said, "Harold, although you are still young, your stomach is already worse than an old man like me. Come to my clinic later. From today onwards, you can't drink anymore. Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't be able to last much longer." "All right, I will come," Harold replied with a smile. After that, he brought Doris and Kathy onto the horse-drawn carriage. Although Dr. Matthew is a good man, he still likes to use the doctor's way of scaring people. Harold consoled himself. Harold comforted himself in his heart. However, looking at his wife and daughter sitting opposite him, his heart was still clouded with a layer of haze. "Go to Amy's," Harold said to the coachman. "Today's new item, soy milk and youtiao set meal. Breakfast special." It was written on the wooden sign at the entrance of Amy's this morning. "What's soy milk? What's youtiao?" It's actually only available for breakfast. Could the soy milk and youtiao be connected? No matter what it is, Mr. Mac has finally developed the first authentic breakfast set meal. Although it was still early, there was already a long line at the entrance. The customers were guessing curiously when they saw the sign. Harold's horse-drawn carriage stopped outside Amy's. He lifted the curtain and saw the long line at the entrance of the restaurant. He couldn't help but click his tongue. It's not even 7 a.m. Why are there so many people queuing? I heard that this restaurant is ranked first in the new delicious cuisine rankings. It's very popular. I didn't expect there to be so many people. Doris was also surprised. Although she was mentally prepared before she came, she didn't expect there to be so many customers. Kathy's eyes lit up. She looked up at Harold and said, "My classmate said that the ice cream in this restaurant is super delicious. Father, can I have an ice cream?" "Of course, Kathy, if you want to," Harold said with a smile. Although he didn't like queuing early in the morning, he didn't find it too difficult to accept since Kathy liked it. After all, his mission today was to accompany them for the day. Harold's family lined up in a line. He listened to the customers in two lines arguing about the sweetness and saltiness of the tofu pudding. Most of his attention was still on the new item released today. It's quite an interesting restaurant. His keen sense of sales made him feel that this restaurant wasn't ordinary. However, he still didn't want to eat breakfast. A glass of water was better than anything else. The restaurant opened for business. The customers filed in an orderly manner. Harold was a little surprised that the interior of this restaurant that suddenly appeared in the corner of the square was so exquisite and elegant. After he sat down, he didn't even bother to open the menu. He said to the waiter, "I want a copy of your new breakfast set meal." Chapter 1098. It's a serious gastric ulcer with bleeding points. It's showing signs of developing into stomach cancer. In the kitchen, Meg glanced at Harold in surprise. This young man, who looked like he was in his early 30s, already had such a serious gastric problem. If it wasn't treated properly, it would be a tragedy in no time. Meg sighed in his heart. Young people had to maintain their health. Otherwise, their bodies would be worse than those of centenarians. "All right, Madam and Cutie, what would you like to order?" Yabamiya asked Doris and Kathy with a smile. "I like a youtiao and soy milk set meal, too." Doris smiled elegantly. Then, she placed the menu in Kathy's direction. "Kathy, you can order whatever you want." "I'd like an ice cream," Kathy said without hesitation. Mia shook her head slightly and said, "Ice cream is cold. It's not legal to eat it after waking up. It'll hurt your stomach. If Cutie wants to eat it, you can eat something else to fill your stomach first." "Hurt your stomach." Harold felt his nerves being stirred. He looked at Kathy and said, "Kathy, let's eat something else first." Then, "I'd like the same as father and mother," Kathy said after thinking for a while. Then, she quickly added, "and a strawberry ice cream." "All right." Mia nodded. Then, she asked, "There are two flavors of soy milk, sweet and savory. Which one would you like?" "Sweet and savory?" Harold seemed to be in deep thought. "Sweet tofu pudding is the way to go. Then, sweet soy milk must be something super delicious, right? Savory tofu pudding is the orthodox one. I like to choose savory soy milk." The customers at the side had already started arguing about the flavor of soy milk. Although they were all speaking softly, they didn't seem to want to give in. "I like a sweet soy milk with less sugar," Harold said. Then he looked at Doris. "Do you want the savory one?" "Yes, I'd like a savory soy milk." Doris nodded with a smile in her eyes. Although they hadn't eaten together for a long time, Harold still remembered her preferences. "I want it sweet, the kind with super polysaccharide." Kathy raised her small hand. "All right, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded slightly before looking at Harrison, who was sharing a table with Harold's family. "Miss Mia, isn't there a purchase limit for soy milk?" Before Yabamiya could say anything, Harrison spoke first. The soy milk on the menu looked a little like tofu pudding. "Yes, there's no limit to the purchase of soy milk. You can order as many as you want." "All right, then I'll have 2 youtiao and soy milk sets, 1 sweet, 1 savory, and 1 sweet tofu pudding." "Although I'm a fan of sweet tofu pudding, I still have to be brave enough to try it," Harrison said with a smile. "All right, please wait a moment." Yabamiya smiled and turned to leave. Harold looked around without batting an eyelid. As a salesman, it was inevitable for him to socialize. He had some understanding of the restaurants in the Aiden Square, but he didn't expect there to be such a unique restaurant. The elves and demons were sitting together at the same table, while the goblins and dwarves were sitting together harmoniously. This was a scene that couldn't be seen anywhere else. They're queuing up so early in the morning just for breakfast? These people are so free, Harold thought to himself. Usually, he would be having a morning meeting in the company at this time. "Your soy milk and youtiao set." Not long after, Yabamiya served the family of 3 soy milk and youtiao and placed them in front of them gently. "This is soy milk and youtiao." Harold looked at the 2 golden, oily things on the plate in front of him. A crispy aroma wafted over. Although it looked a little oily, it didn't feel too greasy. Then he looked at the bowl of steaming white soup in the white porcelain bowl at the side. This should be the so-called soy milk. It looked a little similar to rice soup and had a faint bean aroma. There was nothing special about it. 300 copper coins for a set. It doesn't seem like much, Harold thought to himself. It wasn't as appetizing as the beefhead noodles at the noodle shop next door that cost 30 copper coins a bowl. "Wow, it's so chubby. This youtiao looks so cute." Kathy had already reached out to grab a youtiao. She looked at it before opening her mouth wide and taking a big bite. Crunch! A crisp sound rang out. Kathy's eyes lit up instantly. She chewed, and the more she chewed, the more fragrant it became. A blissful expression appeared on her face. "This youtiao is so soft and crispy. It's so delicious," Kathy said in surprise after swallowing it in one bite. Then she quickly took a big bite of the youtiao. This was much better than the bread she had every morning. "Eat slowly," Doris reminded with a smile. Then she picked up the soup spoon. The savory soy milk in front of her seemed to have some kind of sauce added to it compared to the sweet soy milk. There were even some chopped green onions floating on top. She stirred it gently with the soup spoon. There were also some seaweed and small shrimps inside. The savory aroma, mixed with the bean aroma, wafted to her face together with the heat. Her eyes lit up, and she scooped up a spoonful of soy milk and put it into her mouth gracefully. The sauce aroma, savory aroma, and freshness of the shrimps were perfectly blended together by the soy milk. Then it bloomed in her mouth at the same time. Her taste buds that had no appetite in the morning were immediately stimulated. The bean aroma was so rich, and the savory aroma was just right. It slid down her throat, and the warm soy milk turned into a warm current that flowed all the way to her stomach. It was so warm that she felt her whole body being warmed up. Unbelievably delicious. Doris couldn't help but exclaim. She looked up at Harold and urged him, "You should try it too." "Is it really that delicious?" Harold didn't quite believe it. He scooped up a spoonful of soy milk, and the steam rose up. He put it to his mouth and blew on it before putting it into his mouth. Once the warm soy milk entered his mouth, it was like rain after a long drought. It moistened his dry lips and moistened his slightly sour mouth. The sweet bean aroma started to spread, washing away the sourness. His tired taste buds were like grass that was moistened by the spring rain. They started to wake up gradually. The sweetness wasn't overpowering, and the bean aroma was even more refreshing. The warm soy milk slid down his throat slowly. His throat that was sore from vomiting and hangover last night seemed to be comforted and moisturized by a gentle hand. The dry and painful feeling disappeared magically. The warmth slid into his stomach and chased away all the sourness. The warm feeling lingered in his stomach, and the discomfort in his stomach was significantly alleviated. What a wonderful feeling! After drinking a mouthful of soy milk, Harold actually felt his whole body become much more transparent. It was as if he had come back to life. He couldn't help but put another spoonful of soy milk into his mouth. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the wonderful feeling of being moisturized. Then, he opened his eyes and picked up a youtiao with his chopsticks to take a bite. Smells so good. Chapter 1099. Crunch. The youtiao let out a crisp sound when he bit into it lightly. The golden and swollen youtiao was actually fluffy and hollow inside. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. It did not feel greasy at all. This reminded Harold of the small crepes his mother liked to make when he was young. The thin crepes were also crispy and delicious after being fried in the oil. However, he had not tasted it for more than 10 years, and he would not have the chance to in the future either. He swallowed the crispy youtiao and had a mouthful of soy milk. It was a perfect match. This steaming hot breakfast had already made him forget his disdain for breakfast earlier. He only felt a warmth in his stomach after eating the youtiao and soy milk. The discomfort in his stomach caused by drinking too much last night was completely gone after eating the youtiao and half a bowl of soy milk. What a wonderful combination. What a wonderful breakfast. Looks like I have to come for breakfast in the future, Harold thought to himself. Harold thought to himself that he could consider coming over for breakfast before going to work when he resumed work at 8 a.m. He had to admit that Dr. Matthews' words in the morning still had some effect on him. Kathy was so young, and Doris had been a full-time housewife for many years. If he, the pillar of the family, collapsed, then they would not have anyone to rely on. He did not want to take medicine, but he wanted to eat some breakfast every day. This soy milk and youtiao set meal seemed to be a good choice. Harrison, who had been swallowing his saliva for a while, also ordered 2 sets of meals. Wow, they both look very tempting. Which one should I eat first? Harrison had a conflicted expression on his face. At this moment, Meg walked out of the kitchen with a kitchen knife and reminded them with a smile, "Oh, right. Customers who ordered the savory soy milk set meal, perhaps you can try soaking a small piece of youtiao in the soy milk. Perhaps you will get an extra delicious taste." "Mr. Mack, why didn't you say so earlier? We're all done. I have no choice but to order another set. This savory soy milk with youtiao is simply addictive. The sweet soy milk is surprisingly delicious. The soy milk should be sweet, and the tofu pudding should be salty. This is the right combination." The restaurant suddenly became lively. The customers who ate quickly could only order another serving, not wanting to miss the special delicacy in Meg's mouth. Harrison, who was debating which set meal to eat first, saw the savory soy milk on the right. Without thinking, he picked up a youtiao, broke it into small pieces, and put it into the savory soy milk. He carefully submerged it with a spoon. After a while, he scooped up a spoonful of savory soy milk and put it into his mouth. The savory soy milk was especially refreshing. The fresh aroma of the small shrimps blended perfectly with the fragrance of the sauce. A little chopped green onion made the savory soy milk even more delicious and refreshing. There's nothing better than waking up early in the morning to drink such delicious soy milk. Harrison couldn't help but exclaim. Then he picked up a youtiao and took a bite. The crispy texture and the rich aroma of the deep-fried noodles became more and more intense as he chewed. The texture was not as hard as ordinary fried noodles. Instead, it was crispy and delicious. Moreover, the interior was hollow, which made the texture very special. This youtiao is the pinnacle of the deep-fried world. It's clearly sealed from the outside. How did Mr. Mack make the youtiao hollow? It's incredible. Harrison took a few bites of the youtiao and was full of praise again. Now, let me try the savory soy milk soaked in the youtiao. Harrison put down the youtiao in his hand and excitedly scooped up a section of youtiao soaked in the savory soy milk with a spoon. He put it into his mouth along with half a spoonful of soy milk. The crispy youtiao became soft after soaking in the savory soy milk. It absorbed the savory soy milk and had a special texture and taste when chewed. It was salty and refreshing with the crispness of the youtiao. The combination of the two really burst out an incredible delicacy. One set meal, 3 ways to eat it. Mr. Mac is indeed a genius. Harrison murmured to himself as he ate happily. Soon, he finished the savory soy milk set meal. His eyes fell on the sweet soy milk set meal. The savory soy milk brought him a huge surprise. It made him look forward to the savory soy milk a little less. He scooped up a spoonful of the sweet soy milk and put it into his mouth. The sweet savory soy milk was quite refreshing. However, he felt a little bland when he drank the savory soy milk right after he had the savory soy milk. It did not have the strong impact that the savory soy milk had before. However, it could be considered a delicious breakfast combination with the youtiao. Although the sweet soy milk is not bad, I decided to stand on the savory soy milk side this time. Savory soy milk, sweet tofu pudding. Harrison touched his stomach in satisfaction after finishing the 2 sets very quickly. Compared to the braised chicken and rice and Yangzhou fried rice, this professional breakfast was indeed more refreshing after finishing it. Harold also finished his breakfast. The amount was just right for him. He did not feel too full, but the warmth that was still spreading from his stomach made him feel very comfortable all over. Harold glanced in the direction of the kitchen with a smile and said to Doris, "This boss must have extraordinary culinary skills to be able to make so many customers line up. Since my stomach feels better after breakfast, I'll come here every day for breakfast." Harold glanced in the direction of the kitchen and smiled at Doris. Doris was elated. She nodded and said, "Great. That's great." She had tried to persuade Harold for many years to have breakfast. She did not expect him to decide to have breakfast after eating the youtiao and soy milk set meal today. Bringing Mamie's today was indeed the right choice. Kathy also put down her spoon and said to Harold, "I've finished the soy milk and youtiao. Father, can I have the ice cream now?" "Of course." Harold nodded. He raised his hand to signal the waiter to order the ice cream that Kathy had been craving for a long time. Harold and Doris also smiled when they saw the little one licking the ice cream happily. It had been a long time since their family came out to eat together like this. The soy milk and youtiao set meal received a good response. However, there seemed to be another debate about whether to drink the soy milk sweet or savory. Meg chose to ignore it. The customers who ate the soy milk and youtiao set meal this morning all had different degrees of relief for their stomachs. It seems like the soy milk and youtiao have good relief and healing effect for the stomach. Meg was deep in thought in the kitchen. He had observed carefully before and deduced the effect of a new product by comparing the differences in the customer's body data when they entered and left the restaurant. This was clearly another new product. I wonder what effect Buddha jumps over the wall will have. Meg thought as he looked at the pot that was boiling on the stove. Chapter 1100. Father, what's cooking in your pot? Is it a new dish? Amy asked curiously as she came back from school at noon. She stood at the kitchen door and looked at the big pot with a lid. Phyllis and Anna were also looking at Meg curiously. Meg had been boiling something with the lid closed since this morning. They didn't see him lift the lid at all. This is a pot of thick soup. It's the soup base for the new dish. As for the new dish, you can only eat it at night, Meg said with a smile. Buddha jumps over the wall was a very complicated dish. In order to make a pure and delicious Buddha jumps over the wall, every step had to be done carefully. Furthermore, this was after the system had upgraded and improved it. With the help of some high-tech kitchen utensils, he was able to make a pot of Buddha jumps over the wall in a day. According to the normal process, it was impossible to make it without a few days. Is it made with the shark's fin that you brought back yesterday? Amy asked again. Yes, but that's only one of the ingredients. Meg nodded. He looked at the watch, turned off the fire, and opened the lid to take a look. The thick soup was ready. Then he took out the shark's fin and shark's lips that he had dried overnight and put them into the steamer to steam. The ingredients had to be processed one by one. Did you learn any interesting magic from your teacher today? Meg asked with a smile as he put the ingredients away and turned to look at Amy. Yes. Master Julian taught me teleportation magic today. Amy nodded. She took out her magic wand and turned it into a magic wand. Then she drew a circle on the ground. An icy blue light rose, and a chill spread out. With a flash of light, Amy disappeared. Where did Amy go? Anna blinked and looked at the remaining ice chips on the ground. The icy blue light lit up again. When the light faded, Amy appeared again. She was holding a music box in her hands. She said with a smile, "Look, in this way I don't have to climb the stairs to go upstairs." That's pretty good. Meg's mouth twitched. He wondered what Julian's expression would be if he knew that the teleportation magic that he had painstakingly taught Amy was only used to go up and down the stairs. Amy is so awesome, Anna exclaimed as she clapped her little hands. Big sister Anna, let's learn how to dance. I found a very interesting dance yesterday. One person can make many hands. It's very beautiful, Amy said as she waved the music box in her hands. Really? Then I want to see it too. Anna's eyes lit up, and she immediately followed me out of the kitchen. Mia and the others didn't have anything to do now, so they all went over. Moreover, what made them even more concerned was that me said that in half a month, the restaurant will be holding a major festival called New Year. According to tradition, they would need to perform, so naturally, everyone wanted to learn. A one-person, thousand-hand guanyin. Mag took a look at the little elf who was performing and raised his eyebrows. This kind of thing could only be done in the fantasy world, but not everyone could perform it. Father, the soy milk and youtiao this morning are so delicious. Amy wants more, Amy said to Meg expectantly after playing for a while. If Amy wants more, I'll make more for you tomorrow morning. Because I have to make a lot of preparations, I won't be able to eat it this afternoon, Meg said with a smile. All right, Amy can eat it tomorrow morning. Amy nodded. She pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby face. Stop looking. If I can't eat it, you won't be able to eat it either. Meow. Ugly Duckling meowed aggrievedly and shrank its head back in. All right, let's eat, Mag said as he walked out of the kitchen with the last dish. He looked at the girls who were watching the dancing figures on the music box. Go wash your hands first, Meg said to Amy, who was about to sit on the chair. Ow. Amy responded obediently. She took a stool from a side and went to the kitchen to sit on it. Then, she turned on the tap and washed her hands. Everyone sat down and started eating. Father, I heard that the friends we used to play with in the square have moved to their new home. Can we go and play with them? Amy asked Meg as soon as she sat down at the dining table. Of course, but Amy has to study magic during the day, and Father has to cook in the restaurant at night. We can't make time. Why don't we go on the next day off? Meg said after some thought. It seemed that the foundation was quite fast. If they let the children stay outside in this harsh winter, many of them might not survive. All right. Amy nodded. She picked up a piece of chicken with her chopsticks and placed it in Meg's bowl. Thank you for your hard work, Father. You have to eat more chicken. Meg placed a piece of spicy grilled fish into Amy's bowl with a smile and said, Amy, eat more fish too. You'll become smarter after eating fish. No way. All big fish that can be caught are big idiots. Amy looked at the grilled fish and shook her head with an earnest expression. Meg. Amy placed a piece of fish in her mouth and chewed before swallowing. A smile appeared on her face as she said, but big idiot fish is delicious. Then eat more. Meg placed another large piece of fish in her bowl. He didn't know what to say. After lunch, it was time for the restaurant to open for business. Seeing as Phyllis was likely to leave soon, Meg was going to recruit another chef who could take on the responsibility of preparing ingredients. Even though Yabamia's knife skills were quite good, she was already very busy with both the restaurant and the ice cream shop. He really couldn't bear to let her take on the responsibility of preparing ingredients. As for the others, it didn't seem like they were suitable for the job. After a busy lunch, Meg placed a deck chair in front of the restaurant and prepared to take a nap under the warm winter sun. However, just as he closed his eyes, a dark shadow blocked out the sunlight. Meg opened his eyes to find a pair of round car headlights. Huh, why does this look a little familiar? Meg faltered slightly before looking up. He saw Countess Camilla looking down at him with a cold smile on her face. Do I look good? This sun is really round. Meg replied casually. Take a good look. You might not be able to see the sun tomorrow. Camilla's seductive eyes narrowed slightly as she leaned closer to Meg, as if she were going to press him down onto the deck chair. Of course not. The sun will still rise tomorrow, but it won't be as round as today. Meg smiled. He could guess the Countess' intentions. Aren't you afraid of death? Death? Of course I'm afraid of death. However, would you dare to kill someone in broad daylight? Mag smiled as he took out an aqua blue crystal from his pocket. I used a photo stone to record what happened that day. Do you want to watch it together with me, Countess? Come. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1101. What? Camilla's expression instantly froze as she looked at the blue crystal in Meg's hand. This was indeed an image recording stone. This guy was actually so shameless. Did he record everything that happened that day in this image recording stone? Thinking back to that day, when she was tied up shamefully and couldn't control her voice under his whip, the most despicable thing was that in the end, a woman who came out of nowhere slapped her with a chair and hung on the wall. If this kind of content were to spread, her reputation as the Countess of Bartoli would be completely ruined. How could there be any beautiful girls who would be deeply in love with her in the future? If Miss Gloria knew that she might be a masochist, that would be even worse. No, this kind of thing definitely can't happen. Camilla's gaze turned cold as she looked at Meg's neck with a trace of murderous intent in her eyes. There is more than one image recording stone. I left one with a friend. If I die, he will take the image recording stone out for auction. I think it should be able to sell for a good price. Meg looked at Camilla and grinned. Isn't that right, Countess? Camilla forcefully resisted the urge to suck Meg's blood dry. She didn't think that this seemingly decent guy would be so cunning. Humans are indeed the most despicable and shameless. Camilla said coldly, I only want to be safe. If Countess doesn't use any silly methods like stalking, hitting, or kidnapping, I can guarantee that no one else will know about this image recording stone. Meg shrugged with a harmless smile on his face. You. Camilla was so angry that her entire body trembled, but she couldn't do anything. She was the Countess of Bartoli, but she was actually being played and threatened by a human chef. She couldn't accept this. Meg looked at the pair of soft breasts that swayed with their owner and blinked. The sun was still a bit dazzling. Mr. Meg, Countess Bartoli, what are you doing? At this moment, a surprised voice sounded from behind them. Gloria, who had just come down from the carriage, saw the scene in front of the restaurant and covered her mouth with her hand. Meg was lying on the deck chair, while Camilla was on top of him, almost completely pressing him under her body. The distance between their faces was no more than 10 centimeters. Such a charming and gentle scene actually happened in broad daylight, and it gave her a huge impact. Camilla's expression froze again. Although she didn't turn her head, she could already tell that it was Gloria's voice. Her gaze swept downwards, and a trace of redness appeared on her pale face. She didn't think that in her excitement, just now, she was in such an embarrassing position with Meg. What was even more unexpected was that Miss Gloria actually appeared at this time. Hesitation flashed across her eyes as she looked at the photo stone in Meg's hand. If he gave his photo stone to Miss Gloria, then she would be sentenced to death. Countess, if you really want to be a waitress in the restaurant, you don't have to do this. As long as your ability is good enough, I'll welcome you to the restaurant. Meg changed the topic and said seriously, Camilla, when did I say that I want to be a waitress? Also, you're using seduction to become a waitress? You shameless bastard. Camilla's eyes gradually widened. She wanted to use her sharp nails to cut open Meg's chest and dig out his heart to eat. I've changed my mind. If you want to take back all the photo stones, then agree to my conditions. Meg's voice suddenly lowered as he looked at Camilla and smiled. Bastard, you actually wanted to be a waitress. Camilla felt that she was about to explode in anger. However, when she thought that her embarrassing appearance might be publicized, she could only grit her teeth and stand up for Meg's body. She looked at Meg arrogantly. It's your honor that I can come to your restaurant. You should bow down and welcome me. So it's just an interview. Gloria was stunned when she heard the conversation between the two. Meg ignored Camilla's pretentious, queenly attitude and turned to look at Gloria. He was a little surprised. Miss Gloria, why are you here? Camilla also seemed to have just noticed Gloria. She gently tugged at her clothes and looked at her with a charming smile. She said gently, My dear Miss Gloria, long time no see. How are you? Greetings, Countess. Gloria bowed slightly, but there was a trace of caution in her eyes when she looked at Camilla. Yesterday, her grandfather called her alone and told her to keep a distance and be vigilant with this countess. The strange things that happened around her before might have been caused by her. When she looked at Meg, there was a bit of joy in her eyes. She took 2 steps forward with a smile and said, I have something to discuss with Mr. Meg, so I came abruptly. Oh, it's okay. I have nothing to do now anyway. Meg sat up in the recliner and looked at Camilla again. He smiled and said, Countess, you don't mind, right? Gloria's different attitude had already made Camilla a little sad. Meg's appearance of wanting to throw the bad guy to her made her feel even more displeased. However, she had to put on a smile and shook her head slightly. Miss Gloria, if you have something to talk about, you can talk about it. I naturally don't mind. Then please leave us for a moment. Meg pointed to the side and said with a smile. Camilla gritted her teeth. When she saw Gloria turn her head, she forced a smile and said, Okay, you two talk first. After saying that, she walked to the side and gave Meg and Gloria the space. This guy, I'm going to suck his blood dry sooner or later. Camilla clenched her fists and thought to herself. After so many years, she had never been so aggrieved like today. Miss Gloria, please sit here. Meg stood up and led Gloria to a seat on the side. After she sat down, he sat down opposite her and said with a smile, What do you want to talk to me about? Now that Suede is on the right track, the profits for the past 2 months have been calculated. 1/10 of it is your dividend. I've already exchanged it for banknotes from Buffett Bank and brought it to you. It's a total of 530,000 copper coins. Gloria took out 2 banknotes from her small bag and placed them on the table. She smiled and said, Previously, I promised to give 1/10 of Suede's profits to Miss Luna's foundation to help the children. However, I'm not very familiar with Miss Luna. I wonder if Mr. Meg can help me give this money to her. The weather is cold in the winter. Suede prepared a batch of winter clothes for the children. I hope Miss Luna can help distribute it. Chapter 11:02. When Meg heard what Gloria had done for the children and saw the sincere smile on her face, he couldn't help but smile as well. What a nice girl. It was great to be able to take off her cloak and live a new life. Camilla was watching from a distance, muttering to herself as she pinched a leaf. If Meg did anything bad, she would step in and save the damsel in distress. However, this guy was too good at hiding in front of others. Who would have thought that this man with a warm smile on his face would skillfully tie the embarrassing knot in the little darkroom? Then he would use the leather whip to hit the softest and most sensitive parts of the body. Then he would hold the red candle and smile strangely. Moreover, the scariest thing was that this guy had recorded everything with a photo stone. This was a beast in human form. Camilla roared in her heart. She wanted nothing more than to kill Meg with a karate chop and rescue Gloria from this devil's abyss. I will transfer the money to Teacher Luna. I will also tell her about the winter clothes. She knows the children very well and is very attentive. She is indeed the best person to distribute these things. Meg said with a smile. Thank you, Gloria said gratefully. She was afraid that she would be too late. Winter was already over, and the children still wouldn't be able to wear new cotton clothes. All right, how are the new winter clothes selling? Meg asked curiously. He had given Gloria a few down jacket designs before, but he didn't know how they were progressing. Seeing that she was still wearing a trench coat today, he guessed that she hadn't finished them yet. The sample clothes are already done. They are very beautiful and super warm. However, because we need to fill the clothes with fluff, we need to purchase a lot of feathers and do some fine processing. The first batch of 10-down jackets is already being rushed. The production should be able to increase in the future. Gloria looked at Meg with admiration and praised, "Mr. Meg is really amazing. Every piece of clothing you design is so beautiful." "Miss Gloria, you flatter me. It's just a hobby." Meg waved his hand with a profound look on his face. The blueprint library that he had swindled from his system was enough for him to use for a few years. It was no problem for him to show off. Shameless. The system's indignant voice rang in Meg's mind. Gloria's eyes were filled with stars as she thought to herself, even a top-notch tailor would be amazed by his hobby. Perhaps Mr. Meg is a genius designer who was held back by cooking. Meg and Gloria chatted for a while. Meg asked some questions about the Aiden Chamber of Commerce and Jeffrey. After going through so much, he was still full of fighting spirit to overthrow the Aiden Chamber of Commerce's rule over the Aiden Square. He also believed that it wouldn't be long before he could bring down Jeffrey and make the Aiden Chamber of Commerce officially abolish the discrimination against half-breeds. This was what he wanted to do as a father and as a boss. Gloria was not scheming at all. She answered whatever Meg asked. Unfortunately, she didn't know much about these things, so she didn't give Meg any useful information. In half a month, the Aiden Chamber of Commerce's year-end celebration will be held. Mr. Meg, little Amy, and the ladies of the restaurant, would you like to attend? Gloria asked with a smile. Year-end celebration? But I'm not a member of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. Meg shook his head. Last time, he was invited by Miss Hill. This time, he didn't receive an invitation. I'm now a member of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce's Board of Directors. If you're willing to attend, you can enter with this gold card of mine. Gloria took out a gold card and handed it to Meg. This? Meg looked at the gold card and hesitated for a moment. He took it and nodded with a smile. Okay. Thank you very much, Miss Gloria. You're welcome. An inexplicable blush appeared on Gloria's face as she bade farewell. If it's the year-end celebration, then the first president's election should be starting soon, right? I wonder if Miss Hill is ready to challenge Jeffrey. Meg played with the gold card in his hand thoughtfully, playing with the card that still has Miss Gloria's body scent and warmth. He thinks he's touching her body? Damn pervert. Camilla came to the table at some point and sat down where Gloria was sitting with a look of disgust. Sitting on the chair that still has Miss Gloria's body scent and warmth, and rubbing the rough chair. You think you're already wriggling on her body, Miss Masochist? Mag kept the card and leaned back comfortably in his chair with a smile as he replied with a question. Camilla's body stiffened again. How could such a deep thought that she had been hiding be exposed so easily? I'll repeat it again. I'm a masochist, not a masochist, Camilla said in a deep voice. Meg stopped before going too far and changed the topic. I wonder if Miss Masochist has already considered joining the restaurant? You only need a year to get back all the photo stones. I will also keep my mouth shut about this matter and won't say a word to a third person. A year. Camilla's voice suddenly raised a few octaves. Yes, but you don't have to worry. I'll still pay you. Your benefits will be the same as the other waiters. Meg nodded and took out the photo stone to play with. How do I know if you're lying to me? You didn't have a photo stone with you that day. Camilla stared at the photo stone in Meg's hand. Then you can see for yourself. Meg casually tossed the photo stone over. Camilla caught the photo stone and glanced at Meg. She then gathered her mental strength into the photo stone doubtfully. Harder, harder. Slap, slap, slap. The shameful images and sounds made Camilla's pale face turn red. Bastard. Shameless. Pervert. Masochist. Camilla angrily threw the photo stone back to Meg. You're the one who prepared everything. This can only be considered as self-defense. Mag shrugged innocently. Camilla opened her mouth, but couldn't refute. She suddenly remembered that this photo stone looked familiar. It seemed like she had specially brought it that day to record the images so that she could give it to Miss Gloria as proof that Meg was a pervert. All right, take off your clothes. I'm going to start the official interview. Meg stood up and looked at Camilla. Chapter 11:03. Take off my clothes? Camilla's eyes widened as she stared at Meg in disbelief. This guy actually wants me to take off my clothes in broad daylight? Isn't this request a little too exciting? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about your cloak. I need to test if you could do the job, so I need to go into the kitchen. It's not very convenient for you to wear this cloak. Meg gestured at Camilla's cloak. Oomph. Camilla snorted coldly. She flicked her finger, and the cloak on her shoulder slid down and hung on the chair. There was an inexplicable sense of disappointment in her heart. Please come in with me. Meg walked toward the dining room and held the door for Camilla to enter before letting go. In the kitchen, Phyllis was seriously practicing her fried rice. Meg walked to the kitchen door and watched Phyllis skillfully lift the fried rice in the iron wok. It turned into a beautiful rainbow before falling back into the iron wok again. He nodded with satisfaction. This girl's talent was really too good. If it wasn't for the fact that Irina really needed such a talent, he definitely wouldn't have let her go. I didn't expect an elf to be able to cook so well. Camilla also came to the kitchen door and couldn't help but exclaim. Phyllis turned off the fire and put the fried rice on a plate before looking at the kitchen door. Boss! Phyllis nodded slightly at Meg, and then her gaze lingered on Camilla's soft breast for a moment. She suddenly felt defeated. Why are all the women around Mr. Meg so big? As expected, he still likes women with big breasts? Phyllis, very good. Meg walked into the kitchen and smiled. Can I try? Of course. Phyllis hurriedly nodded and handed a clean spoon to Meg. Her eyes were full of anticipation. Mr. Meg said that as long as she learned how to cook Yangzhou fried rice and braised chicken and rice, she could go to Her Highness' side and help her. Meg scooped up a spoonful of fried rice and put it into his mouth. It was just ordinary rice with ordinary ingredients, but in his mouth, it exploded into an inconceivably wonderful taste. Chewing carefully, he felt the wonderful taste of the various ingredients colliding in his mouth, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. Phyllis didn't use the ingredients provided by the system, and Meg had also made some changes to the original recipe, replacing the ingredients with ingredients that could be easily obtained in the Wind Forest. The situation in the Wind Forest had already reached the level of war. It was already difficult for the frontline soldiers to fill their stomachs. Naturally, there was no requirement for ingredients. But even with the change of ingredients, the fried rice made by Phyllis was still as delicious as ever. Very good. Meg opened his eyes and gave Phyllis a thumbs up. You don't have to practice cooking fried rice anymore. I'll teach you how to make braised chicken and rice later. Really? Phyllis's face lit up, but she still found it hard to believe Meg. Of course. Meg nodded, and then turned to Camilla, who was standing at the kitchen door, and introduced, This is Countess Bartoli. You're about to leave, so I'm planning to hire another worker in charge of preparing ingredients. She just volunteered, but I still need to test her ability first. Hello. Phyllis nodded slightly at Camilla, but a strange look flashed in her eyes. She had heard the princess mention Countess Bartoli before. She should be a vampire, and she seemed to have been molested by the princess in the past. Camilla withdrew her murderous gaze from Meg and looked at Phyllis and said calmly, Hello. She didn't have a good impression of the elves. Irina had embarrassed the vampires many times before, and she had also repeatedly. Those unbearable memories made her dislike the elves, but she still maintained a certain level of vigilance. Countess Bartoli, please come in, Meg said to Camilla, and pulled out a thick, long, and round cucumber from the side. What were you doing? Camilla looked at the yellow light in Meg's hand, and her throat moved unconsciously as she asked cautiously, I need to test your knife skills and talent. Meg put the cucumber on the chopping board, took the Chinese kitchen knife, and cut it in half from the middle. In the blink of an eye, half of the cucumber had already been cut into long, thin strips the size of toothpicks and arranged neatly on the chopping board. Your turn. Meg turned his wrist and handed the kitchen knife in his hand to Camilla. What's so difficult about this? Camilla smiled contemptuously and took the kitchen knife to cut the cucumber in front of her. Blood. Meg looked at the intact cucumber, and then at Camilla, who was pinching her fair and slender fingers, and his eyelids twitched wildly. He felt like he had found the wrong person. This countess didn't look like someone who could cut cucumbers well at all. This stupid cucumber hurt me. Camilla stared at the cucumber on the chopping board with some annoyance. It's just a small cut. If you didn't pay attention, it would have healed by itself. Meg couldn't help but roll his eyes and sighed. Forget it. It seems like you're not qualified to work in the kitchen. I take back what I said before. You can't be a new employee of the restaurant. This guy, he's looking for an excuse to announce the photo stone. No, this can't happen. Camilla looked at Meg with a trace of anxiety in her eyes, but her expression was still cold and arrogant. She sneered. It's just a cucumber. I can cut it into a strand of hair for you. She raised her right hand, and 5 sharp nails extended from her fingertips like 5 sharp knives. She scratched the cucumber a few times, and when she retracted her hand, the cucumber on the chopping board had already turned into a pile of hair-like strands. Meg reached out and pinched a hair-like cucumber strand. Even he couldn't help but admire her knife skills. This is the 9-inch skeletal claw, right? Meg put down the cucumber strand. There was nothing to say about her knife skills, but when he thought about how it was scratched with claws, he felt a strange feeling in his heart. Anyway, he couldn't accept a dish made this way. I cut even finer than you. Are you satisfied now? Camilla said proudly as she took out a manicure knife to clean her nails. Meg shook his head and said, using claws doesn't meet the hygiene standards of the restaurant. If you can turn your claws into knives of similar size and, at the same time, maintain the same level of knife skills, then you'll be hired. Such a simple thing. Of course I can do it easily. Camilla picked up 5 small knives and then cut a cucumber into round segments of different sizes. Chapter 1104. Meg caught a piece of cucumber that rolled off the chopping board and threw it into his mouth. As he chewed on the crisp and refreshing cucumber, he looked at the slightly embarrassed Camilla with a smile and said, "Congratulations, you've been hired. If there are no special circumstances, you can come over tomorrow morning to familiarize yourself with the work. Phyllis will tell you what work you need to do." Camilla, who was thinking about how to resolve the awkwardness, was stunned for a moment. She looked at Meg and said, "Didn't you say I can't use my claws? I've already thought of a solution. I'll tell you when you come tomorrow," Meg replied calmly. "Come out. I have something to say to you alone." Camilla turned and walked out of the kitchen. "Wait a moment," Meg said to Phyllis, and followed Camilla to a position near the door. "Although I was coerced by your despicable methods and agreed to do some things for you, the fact that I'm a waitress in a restaurant can't be known by others. Otherwise, my reputation will be greatly damaged," Camilla said with a serious expression. Meg nodded slightly and said, "The preparation of ingredients can be completed before the restaurant starts operating. If you don't want others to know about this, then you can leave after you're done with your work. The customers won't know that you're an employee of the restaurant. It's a deal. It's only for a year. If you still want to play any tricks by then, I won't let you go." Camilla clenched her fists. "Don't worry, I'm a person of my word. As long as you work hard and be obedient in this year, I'll give you all the photo stones." Meg nodded. "Humph." Camilla snorted coldly and turned to leave. "Wait, I'll give you your chef's uniform." Meg turned to the counter and took out a set of female chef's uniform and handed it directly to Camilla. "You're making me wear this?" Camilla looked at the chef's uniform in Meg's hands, and there was a hint of anger in her eyes. "This is a work uniform. The chef has to ensure that the food is clean and hygienic for the customers. The dress you're wearing and your flying hair clearly don't meet the standards." Meg looked at her wavy hair. If a strand of hair fell into the ingredients, it would be troublesome. It would be a disaster. Camilla hesitated for a moment before taking the chef's uniform. "By the way, since you're going to work in the restaurant and become a member, it's not convenient to call you Countess. I'll call you Camilla." Meg paused for a second before revealing a smile. "You can call me boss. This guy actually dared to call me by my name." Camilla's eyes were burning with rage as she gritted her teeth and said, "Meg, well, you can call me whatever you like." Meg shrugged indifferently. He didn't care about this anyway. Camilla took the clothes and angrily pushed the door open. She did not want to stay in this place for a second longer. "Madam, are you all right? You don't look too good. What are you holding in your hand?" The black cat servant came forward and asked cautiously as he looked at Camilla's pale face. "Scram." Camilla pasted the chef's uniform in her hand on the black cat's face before turning into a black shadow and disappearing without a trace. "Is that a chef's uniform? Why is Madam holding a chef's uniform?" Caesar looked at the uniform in confusion, but he quickly turned into a black light and chased after Camilla. After Camilla left, Meg began to teach Phyllis how to make the braised chicken and rice. This dish was actually simpler than Yangzhou fried rice. She only needed to put the ingredients into the pot according to the order and take them out of the pot at the right time. Phyllis learned very quickly, and Meg taught her very easily. Soon, they finished the lesson. Meg washed his hands and was about to leave. "Mr. Meg, do you think Her Highness will succeed?" Phyllis suddenly asked from behind. "Yes, she will definitely succeed." Meg looked back at her and nodded with certainty. Phyllis's nervous expression relaxed a lot. She sniffed and said, "Thank you. Then I'm going out." "You can continue," Meg said with a smile as he pulled the bicycle out of the door. He rode the bicycle to Chaos School. Today was a holiday for the students, so the guard allowed Meg to ride the bicycle into the school. When Meg rode the bicycle to the female teacher's dormitory, Luna was coming out with a stack of students' workbooks. She was surprised to see Meg and said, "Mr. Meg, what brings you here?" "Teacher Luna, I'm here to look for you." "I didn't expect to see you here," Meg said with a smile. "Why are you looking for me?" Luna looked at Meg with confusion. "It's about the foundation. Miss Gloria came to see me just now. It's about the donation of suede, clothing, and winter clothes for the children. Let's go sit in the pavilion over there for a while." Luna led Meg to a nearby pavilion. Miss Gloria promised to donate 10% of the profits from suede clothing. Meg told Luna what Gloria had told him this afternoon and handed the 2 checks to Luna. "Here are 2 checks. One is donated by Miss Gloria, and the other is a little token of my appreciation for the children," Meg said with a smile. Meg had some assets now, so he donated 10% of the profits that Gloria had given him today. "Mr. Meg, your ice cream shop has already provided a lot of help to the foundation. This money," Luna said hesitantly. "The children still have to go to school and eat. There are many places where they need to spend money. Teacher Luna, please accept it on behalf of the foundation. It was also because of you that Amy could eat her fill. Now we can help even more children." Meg shook his head and looked at her with a smile. Luna looked at Meg's gentle smile, and her heart softened. She nodded with a smile. Yes, the children can eat their fill every day now. They don't have to beg on the streets and scavenge for food. They can also see the same smiles on their faces as ordinary children. Winter is over, and the children should be going to school. Have the school buildings been repaired? Meg asked. Luna nodded and said, "The school buildings prepared for the children have been completely repaired. The construction team from the City Lord's Castle is very efficient. The recruitment and training of new teachers is also in progress. I can guarantee that the children will be able to enter school next semester. They have food to eat, a house to live in, and books to study. The children are lucky to have met you." Meg nodded and sighed with emotion. "Mr. Meg, I'm lucky to have met you." Luna looked at Meg and said seriously, Chapter 1105. Evo City, the capital of Atlantis, was surrounded by a circle of silver metal balls as if they were wearing collar. Other than a few fortresses, all the merfolk had retreated into Evo City, waiting for the most violent nether hurricane to strike. However, this time, Atlantis did not choose to defend passively. Instead, they chose to attack. At the northwest border, near the Cursed Seal, a merfolk looked at the yellow sand that covered the sky and let out a shrill warning conch before retreating into the underground base. A team of more than 100 merfolk dressed in colorful clothes went forward to provoke the first wave of nether sharks. They successfully angered the first wave of nether sharks, causing them to run wildly. This chase didn't last long. The mermaid disappeared completely after rushing into a long and narrow canyon. Meanwhile, the 100-odd nether sharks also rushed into the canyon, fighting to be the first to enter. Countless sound wave balls sealed off the two ends of the canyon and the top. The nether sharks stirred up a hurricane as they charged back and forth in the canyon. A metal ball appeared in the midst of the nether sharks. A dazzling silver light flashed, and the hurricane around the nether sharks within a radius of 1,000 meters disappeared instantly, as if they were disarmed. A team of merfolk descended from the sky and stabbed the shining weapons in their hands into the whirlpool above the nether sharks' heads. This was an intense close combat. The nether sharks, who had lost their hurricane defense and space to maneuver, were at a disadvantage for the first time in their battle with the merfolk. The same thing happened in various places in the canyon. The merfolk used the divine weapon bestowed by God to break the nether sharks' hurricane easily, and then used the momentum to attack the nether sharks' weak points to kill or control them. Your Majesty, the front line has reported that the third wave of nether sharks has been killed, a general said excitedly as he rushed into the hall. The king, who was sitting on the throne, and the high priest, who was standing in the middle of the hall, smiled. That's great. The divine weapon bestowed by God is indeed extraordinary. The merfolk in the hall were also elated. They had never heard of such a battle report in the past 1,000 years. The king took a look at the high priest and then at the general. Pass down my orders. Starting from the next wave of nether sharks, don't kill all of them. Choose suitable nether sharks to capture and start building a nether shark fishing ground. Yes, the general replied and quickly left. Hold on. Let them collect the nether shark's fins and lips. That lord has important uses for them, said the high priest. Yes. After returning from chaos school, Meg went straight to the kitchen to complete the last and most important step of Buddha jumps over the wall. He took out an old wine jar from Shaoxing and placed the 30 processed ingredients into the jar in order. He then poured in the broth that he had already prepared, carefully sealed the mouth of the jar with a lotus leaf, and covered it with a small bowl. He placed the wine jar on the charcoal stove that had already been heated and simmered it. Boss, what's this? Phyrus looked on with a dumbstruck expression. Mag had added so many ingredients into that huge vat. What kind of mysterious dish was he trying to cook? Meg had spent an entire day making this dish. You'll know in a while, Meg said with a smile as he looked at the wine jar that was half the height of a person. His eyes were also filled with anticipation. This was the system's so-called high-class dish. He could not wait to see how high-class it was. However, to be honest, the ingredients used in this Buddha jumps over the wall were indeed very high-class. Not to mention those top-grade sea cucumbers and abalones. Just the supply chain of the nether shark's fins and lips was handled by the entire Atlantis. They had spent tens of millions of gold coins to create a fishery in the sea. The cost of such a pot of Buddha jumps over the wall was 20,000 copper coins, excluding the shark's fins and lips. Because this supply chain was set up by Meg himself, it was not included in the cost listed by the system. Adding another 10,000 copper coins to the cost isn't too much at all, right? Meg thought to himself, such a pot of Buddha jumps over the wall could feed 30 people, and each serving cost 10,000 copper coins. Even if he only sold one jar a day, he would still be making a profit of 270,000 copper coins. Actually, Meg was still a little worried about the sales of the Buddha jumps over the wall that cost 10,000 copper coins per serving. After all, the most expensive dish in the restaurant so far was the spicy grilled fish, which cost 2,500 copper coins per serving. Not to mention Chaos City. Even in Rodu, it was hard to find another restaurant that cost 10,000 copper coins per serving of food. With such ingredients, it would definitely be a great tonic, even if it was stewed messily. Meg convinced himself very easily. Every single one of these ingredients that he chose could be sold at a high price if they were taken out individually. After they tried this pot of Buddha jumps over the wall at night, there were still 20-odd servings left. He also planned to launch this new dish and see how the market reacted. On the second floor of the magic potion shop next door, Amy ran upstairs with an empty birdcage. She looked at Julian, who was writing something at the desk, and said, Teacher Julian, I just used a teleportation spell on black coal, but I don't know where it was sent to. Can you guys help me find it? It's in the chimney, Julian replied without even raising his head. Oh, so it went there? No wonder I couldn't find it anywhere. Amy's eyes lit up. Then she went downstairs and stuck her head into the fireplace to take a look. It's so dark. I can't see anything. Let's light the fire. Whoosh! The fire lit up the interior of the fireplace, bringing with it a warm light and heat. This king's new clothes! A sharp cry rang out from the chimney, and a blackened crow fell out from the chimney. Its entire body was emitting smoke, and the few feathers that had just grown on its body were once again burnt to a crisp. Charcoal lowered its head to take a look, and its two legs stiffened as it fainted. Poor Black Coal. Did it die just like that? She reached out and pulled Black Coal out. There was a faint barbecued meat aroma in the air. She sniffed and her eyes lit up. It smells pretty good. Let's barbecue it for a while and sprinkle some pepper and cumin. It should be ready to eat. Are you the devil? Black Coal opened its eyes immediately. It flapped its bald wings and tried its best to fly to a shelf at the side. It looked at Amy with fear. If it woke up a little later, it had no doubt that Amy would have roasted it and eaten it. That's great. I thought you were dead, Black Coal, Amy said. But why do you look so disappointed? Is that so? I'm pretty happy, aren't I? Master, let's talk nicely. Can you put down the wand first? I'm a little scared. Don't be scared. It'll be over soon. A smile appeared on Amy's face. She walked over to Black Coal, who was trembling on the shelf with the wand in her hand. Amy, didn't you say that today is Mia's birthday? Do you want to prepare a gift with me? Cece asked with a smile as she interjected from the side. Chapter 1106. Most of the buildings in the Bathai prison were built underground. However, very few people knew that the highest security prison in the Bathai prison wasn't at the 100th floor in the deepest part of the prison. Instead, it was at the 7th floor in the middle. There was only one cell on each floor of these 7 floors. Layers of magic restrictions and hard rocks and steel that were dozens of meters thick formed the most indestructible prison on the Norland continent. Those who were locked up on these 7 floors were all powerhouses who had once ruled over a region. Most of them had been locked up here since 100 years ago. They were labeled as war criminals and imprisoned here. On the 50th floor, the 4th floor of the 7 central floors, a pot-bellied middle-aged prison guard and a young prison guard in his 20s were patrolling the corridor. They got tired of walking back and forth in the 10-meter-long corridor very quickly. The young prison guard went up to the middle-aged prison guard and curiously asked, "Boss, who are the people locked up here? Why do we need so many restrictions? And why does the warden have to come and patrol this place, personally, every day?" The thick and heavy metal door was shut tightly, and there was no way to see what was going on inside the prison. Even the entry and exit of food was through a small teleportation portal. As a newbie who was just assigned to the Bathai prison, he was very interested in the people he was guarding. Of course, the most important thing was to listen to the legends of ruthless people to pass the time. The middle-aged prison guard was also bored out of his mind. Only the newbies would fight to listen to the stories that the old people were already sick of hearing. He mysteriously said, "The person locked up in this prison is Ruthless Rex, whose name shook the entire Norland continent 100 years ago. You might not be familiar with this name, but you should have heard of the Hairless Monk, right? Hairless Monk, the Hairless Monk who massacred a human town and annihilated a demon in the legends." As expected, the young prison guard's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's him." The middle-aged prison guard was obviously very satisfied with the young man's expression. He continued, "This Hairless Monk is a half-demon. It's said that his mother gave birth to him after being defiled by a demon. She was beaten to death by humans because she gave birth to a half-demon. He survived by luck, but because of that, he hated humans and demons immensely. He gradually grew up, and his strength became stronger and stronger. He walked the continent, and his actions were both righteous and evil. Finally, one day, His strength was strong enough to destroy the demon clan that had once defiled his mother. He did not hesitate to go to his father's door and exterminate his father's clan. Then, he returned to his mother's tribe and massacred the entire town. Not even a child was spared. From then on, he gained the title of the Hairless Monk, also known as the Lawless Monk. His actions throughout his life. The middle-aged warden's saliva was flying everywhere as he spoke. The young warden at the side was also intoxicated as he listened. Although the Hairless Monk was brutal in his actions, he could be said to be merciless. It was just that he had implicated too many innocent people. At the end of the racial war, he single-handedly faced off against 4 10th-tier powerhouses and killed one of them. He was heavily injured and captured, and had been imprisoned here for almost 100 years. The young prison guard was a little scared when he heard that. He whispered, "Boss, this Hairless Monk is so powerful. Is our cell still reliable? Could it be? What's there to worry about?" After being imprisoned for 100 years, his vitality had long dried up. It's already a miracle that he could survive until now. How could he still have the strength to break out of the cell? Moreover, our cell is indestructible. There are 7 iron doors inside and outside, and each one is thicker than the last. There are also all kinds of magical restrictions on them. Even the Hairless Monk at his peak wouldn't be able to get out, let alone now. Bam! A thick iron door crashed onto the wall, and a huge hole appeared on the wall. The iron door turned into a pile of scrap metal. There was even a clear footprint in the center. 6 thumbs. The alarm was instantly blaring. The voices of the 2 prison guards stopped abruptly. They stared at the open door with their eyes and mouths wide open. A burly bald man walked out slowly from the passageway. He had dark brown skin and looked like a middle-aged man. He glanced at the 2 prison guards who were leaning against the wall with trembling legs. He turned and walked towards the passageway. He lifted his leg and kicked the passageway door that was more than a meter thick and covered with restrictions. He looked left and right and mumbled, "What exactly is that smell?" Then, he disappeared at the corner of the passageway. Just now that. The prison guard's voice was trembling. First-class incident. The Hairless Monk has broken out of prison. The Hairless Monk has broken out of prison. The middle-aged prison guard grabbed the communication device on his chest and screamed at the top of his voice. "Wow, it smells so good." At the entrance of the kitchen, all the girls looked at the wine jar that had just been opened with the lotus leaf. A human aroma surged out crazily and seeped into their hearts instantly, making their eyes light up. "Father, is this the new dish you made? It's awesome." Amy squinted her eyes and stuck out her little pink tongue to lick her lips. She stared at the wine jar eagerly. Seafood, meat, mushrooms. It's obviously a pot of messy stew, but the aroma is so alluring. After taking a careful sniff, the distinct layering is intoxicating. "Boss is really amazing." Yabamiya also looked at Meg with admiration. As expected, only this kind of Buddha jumps over the wall is worthy of the name Buddha jumps over the wall. Meg took a deep sniff, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. It was tens of thousands of times more delicious than the Buddha jumps over the wall that he had eaten before. Meg didn't let the system isolate the aroma this time. Instead, he let the aroma out as it was. The customers outside the restaurant were curious about what kind of delicacy the Buddha jumps over the wall that Mr. Mac was releasing tonight. Suddenly, an alluring aroma wafted out of the restaurant. "What's this? It smells so good." This special aroma immediately attracted the attention of the customers. Everyone craned their necks to look in the direction of the restaurant and couldn't help but start swallowing their saliva. According to my experience of tasting the restaurant's menu, this aroma doesn't belong to any of the delicacies on the menu. It's very likely that it's the new Buddha jumps over the wall that's being released today. Harrison stroked his chin and said with certainty, "Mr. Mac is so mean. There's still half an hour before the restaurant opens for business, and he's releasing the aroma to tempt us. This is too much. Yeah, it's fine if it's just an ordinary aroma, but this aroma, Gululu, isn't it going to kill us?" The customers started to rub their stomachs and howl with grief and anticipation. Bam! Right at this moment, a figure descended from the sky and landed on the ground in front of the restaurant. The rock that he landed on shattered instantly, and the debris spread out in all directions like a spider web. The restaurant was instantly silent. Everyone looked at the bald man who descended from the sky in confusion. This fellow seemed to have jumped out of Lantis prison. Here, that bald man raised his head and looked at the restaurant. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he took 2 steps forward before lifting his right foot again. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.